There we go.
Welcome everyone to the microphone not working. To the February 4th, there we are now. Welcome everyone to the February 4th meeting of the Lincoln City Council. I'd like to ask you all to join me as we stand and do a pledge of allegiance to the flag. That'll be followed by a moment of silent meditation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Here for it.
In accordance with LB 898,
So we'll call that item, and then you can.
a copy of the Open Meetings Act is posted at the back of the chamber. The order of the business of the City Council is as follows. The clerk will call items listed on the agenda under public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak on an agenda item should come forward after the clerk reads that item. The applicant and those in favor should speak first, then those in opposition. The applicant may make a short rebuttal. Each speaker should begin by stating their name, their address, and whether you're speaking in favor of or in opposition to the item. Testimony is limited to 5 minutes per speaker. After all public hearings, the City Council will vote on resolutions and items listed under third reading. On the second and last meeting of the month, immediately prior to the adjournment, anyone may speak on any issue not on the agenda for that date, nor planned for a future agenda. I'd like to ask the clerk to help us start the meeting. Call our first item.
One announcement, due to the President's Day holiday, the City Council will not meet on Monday, February 18th. We ask those of the general public coming forward to testify to please clearly state your name, spell your name, give your address, and sign in on the sign-in sheet laying on the podium. Testifiers may use either microphone, and there is a sign-in sheet by each microphone. We ask city staff who are testifying to please state your name, title, and the department you work for. Our first item is our public hearing consent agenda, items 1 through 3.
I understand there's some new appointments. The first one being Jessica Giza King. Yes, would you please come forward? Thank you. And, just tell us about yourself and your appointment to the committee, why you're seeking it and how you're going to help us.
My name is Jessica Giesecke, and I am seeking an appointment on the Community Forestry Board of Advisors. I'm actually not in the forestry industry. I mostly work with trees that have been dead for about 100 years because I do historic restoration for a living. But I do have a passion for Lincoln's urban forest and our community's street trees. And so I'm seeking an appointment on the board.
Thank you very much. Questions from the council for this new appointee? Thank you for coming forward. There was another person in the audience who said they were appointed to a board, Teresa, but I don't see any other new appointments on here.
No, the rest are all reappointments.
Okay.
If anyone
Is there
wants
anyone
to
else?
come forward on any other item, they may do so.
Like she said, would anybody else like to speak with any other item on the consent agenda? Okay.
All right, if not, we can vote on these items. Items 1A, B, and C were introduced by Christensen.
So moved. Second.
Have a motion by Councilman Christensen and a second by Councilman Eskridge. Discussion of the motion? Hearing none, would you call the roll?
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Items 2A and B were introduced by Eskridge.
So moved. Second.
Have a motion by Councilman Eskridge and second by Councilman Christensen. Discussion? Hearing no discussion on those items, would you call the roll, please?
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Next then are public hearing liquor resolutions. I'll call items 4A and B together. They're the application of Lincoln Holdings doing business as Yaya's Pizza Meadows for a Class C liquor license at 2840 South 70th Street, Suites 120 and 125, and the related manager application of Nodder Sepulcher.
Good afternoon, Nader Sepapur, 3245 West Summit Boulevard.
Would you raise your right hand? Do you sorry. No, the other right, yeah. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth as you believe it to be?
I do.
Thank you.
His expression was priceless. Welcome. Tell us about your application.
I had a store there previously. It was a burrito shop, and I closed it down about a year ago. It's taking me a long time to redo it and open it up as a Yaya's. And I did have a liquor license prior, but I'd let it expire. And I changed the class on it to a Class C.
I understand. Questions? Councilman Eskridge.
So Yaya's is an institution in our city. How long has that been?
25 years.
25 years, okay. Same plan for
Same
the
plan.
new one?
It'd be a lot smaller. Yaya's Junior.
Okay, very good.
Other questions from the council? Thank you very
Thank
much
you. Thank you.
for your contribution to our downtown, and we're looking forward to you working out in the eastern part of the city. Thank you. And our next agenda item? I think we're done with that, right? I'm sorry. Would anyone else like to testify on this agenda item? Thank you, Roy.
Mr. Chair, I'd move approval of items 4A and B.
Second.
Have a motion by Councilman Camp and a second by Councilman Christensen for approval. Discussion? Madam Clerk, when you're prepared, we are.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Next then are public hearing resolutions. Item 5A is accepting a report of new and pending claims against the city for the period of January 1st through the 15th, 2019.
Chris Connolly, Acting City Attorney. I wanted to bring you up to date on a claim that we've had discussed here before. It's regard to Carol Schroeder. This is a tree matter that happened last fall, and the claim was brought forward in December. There was discussions about whether or not the tree needed to be taken down, and Lynn Johnson was here and presented a fair amount of evidence on this. At the last time we were here, which I believe was January 14th, the council asked that Ms. Schroeder, or her daughter at least, bring forward some better evidence of what the damages were. There was different information on how much they were claiming, and so they were supposed to provide more information. On January 17th, our office received a fax indicating that they are looking for $1,000, which is the deductible amount on their insurance, and the insurance has paid the balance of the $2,200 claim. They were given notice. Amy Filbert, who was the daughter, called our office this morning and indicated they would not be able to make it here today. Apparently they had a death in the family, and so, but there was not a request for a continuance either. So with that information, we are still recommending denial of this claim, but at least now you have the information you were looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Questions for this testifier? Thank you again. So that was number 5A.
Anyone
No.
else? See if there are any others.
Is anyone else that would like to talk about this, speak to this agenda item, pending claims against the city?
Ma'am, now's the time to come forward on your claim.
Thank you, Teresa.
You're welcome. Your name and address.
I'm Tammy Iman. Our address is 8420 Leanna Lane.
Just pull the whole thing towards you. It should slide. Yeah.
Is that better? And I hit a pothole on North 70th, so had to replace a tire and a wheel.
And you're filing a claim against the city in the amount of, could you tell us a little bit more?
I didn't bring I gave the paperwork, the estimate to the attorney.
The amount was $424.98. It's on the list of denied claims.
Okay. Thank you. I feel when I was heading, I was in the southbound lane on North 70th, north of Cornhusker, and it was about 7:15 in the morning. It was dark at that time, and I had semi coming at me, which is in the other lane, so I could not get over. I had a white SUV behind me, so I could not stop. So I had no option but to hit that pothole. And I noticed this morning, because I take that road every day, it's getting just as bad. The exact same pothole is getting just as bad.
Are there questions from the council for this testifier? Mr. Connolly, would you like to come up and share with us, please?
Chris Connolly, acting city attorney. On this particular pothole, we were made aware of this pothole on December 3rd of 2018. And Ms. Iman apparently struck this pothole at about 7:15 a.m. on December 4th. So it was less than a day later. And so later on December 4th, Public Works crews did go out and make a repair on it. I did speak with somebody over there today about what the condition of this hole is right now, and they said they're keeping an eye on it. They have received other complaints, and they keep going out and patching it. Apparently there's a little bit bigger area that will need to be replaced, but they aren't going to be able to get to that until spring just because of the freeze-thaw cycle. So they're just going to have to keep patching it, but they are aware of it, not only to check it themselves, which I was advised they were doing, but as they receive complaints, when they receive complaints, they're going back out and looking at it again and patching it again if need be. And so with the standard that we have here, we're not negligent unless we've had notice and we have not acted in a reasonable amount of time. And so what I would tell you is that if we had notice on December 3rd and we patched it on December 4th with the unfortunate circumstance that Ms. Iman hit it in the meantime, we did not have an adequate amount of time to do the repair, especially since she hit it apparently early in the morning, really before crews could get out there. So with that, that's the reason why we're recommending denial.
Questions from the council? Councilman Camp.
And this may be for Mr. Connolly or maybe Ms. Esposito, but do we have a procedure whereby when we get notice, we would at least put some type of a flagging device so that even though it couldn't be repaired immediately, that motorists could be warned?
Well, I think that they go out and they just do the repair right away is what they do as soon as they can get out there. I'm not aware of a flagging system. I'm not sure if a flagging system would work with a lot of potholes.
Or a cone or something, I mean, just to warn.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a device like that. It doesn't change our exposure to liability. We still have a reasonable amount of time to fix the repair, and I would say certainly in this case, I think we've met that standard.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Gaylor Baird.
Could you define the standard for pothole repair? What is the reasonable time frame, or where we hit the max?
I think our policy is about 4 days is what our policy has been, and that has been working for us for many years. And so, and this one clearly falls within that scope, within that time frame.
Can I say something? Or am I done?
No. Kind of, yeah, but go ahead, please.
That is a highly semi-traffic road, and I think those roads like that need to be monitored probably more so than the cars or SUVs. There's semis on there all the time, and I think that's what's causing the issues that we're having.
Thank you. Other questions from the council? I'd like to thank you both for coming forward. We'll go through the rest of the resolutions and we'll be voting later in the day. Councilwoman Gaylor Baird?
Can Ms. Esposito come speak to this claim?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Oh, is this mic on? Good afternoon, City Council. Mickey Esposito, Director of Lincoln Transportation and Utilities. What can I answer for you?
I know you don't necessarily have the staff here to answer the specific details of questions like these, but with your prioritization system for pothole repair, can you describe what it is in broad terms or detailed terms if you can, but just her point about arterials versus streets with slower speeds does speak to a sense of urgency.
Absolutely, and in fact, we generally try to get arterial street potholes fixed within 2 days, even though we have this 4-day window, especially now that we have a bit of a faster method of fixing potholes through the pothole patcher equipment rather than having a 4-person crew go out there and do cold patch. I don't know all the specifics, but what I do know is we do prioritize high trafficked, high traveled, high speed arterials over residentials, and the 4-day window is really to capture more residential or neighborhood streets.
Other questions for Ms. Esposito?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Would anyone else like to testify on pending claims against the city? Seeing no one else come forward, can we move to our next agenda item?
All right, next I'll call items 5B, C, and D. They are approving an interlocal agreement between the city and the RTSD for monitoring use of not less than 1.5% of the 1/4 cent sales tax increase if approved by the voters of Lincoln related to engineering services for the 33rd and Cornhusker Safety Improvement Project. Item 5C is a resolution freezing impact fee increases due to inflation for a period of 5 years in the event that a 1/4 cent sales tax increase is approved by the voters of Lincoln. And item 5D is directing submittal to the qualified electors of the city a proposed ballot question for the April 9, 2019 primary election to increase the local sales tax rate by 1/4 cent for a 6-year period to be used for street rehabilitation, reconstruction, and improvements of existing neighborhood and arterial streets in all quadrants of the city to maximize their useful life, enhance safety, streamline traffic flow, or promote private sector investment.
Good afternoon, City Council. Again, Mickey Esposito, Lincoln Transportation and Utilities Director, and I'm here with Bob Caldwell, who served as our chair for the Citizens Transportation Coalition. And we'd like to share with you a quick presentation that I think is pulling up right now. But we also had some packets for you with the presentation in hand. So if you wanted to follow along that way, that would be wonderful. Okay, looks like we're ready to go. Bob, you ready?
Well, good afternoon, members of the council, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having us here today. It's very exciting to be here today because about a year ago we spent 5 months studying this issue. And I know what you're saying. You would like to spend 5 months studying the streets of Lincoln also, but we do every day, each of us as citizens, as we drive to school and to work and to the doctor and to all the places we go with our children and our families. We are really the study group that knows our streets. And I was thinking as we were going through this last presenter and thinking about the different potholes that all of us could name across the city. And there are quite a few of them, but this is our opportunity to make progress in that area. And I thank you for having us here today. Our first slide is why our street's important. I don't think I need to elaborate too much on that, but our coalition looked at, are they safe, are they reliable, and are they ready to grow? Because in the areas of the city where many of us live on our existing streets, many of them need repaired. And the reason that's important is that grows our economy, that grows our jobs, and that provides a safe transportation method for our firefighters, for our ambulances, for our community citizens that are traveling those roads. We can talk about all the great things that our city has done, but I heard the mayor mention the other day, it's really our vision. In almost every area of our city, we have a positive vision for where we're heading in our future. And I hope today, as we talk about our roads and our streets, that we have that positive vision and how we can improve it.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped the gun.
Oh, she already took me to the spaghetti map. Mickey and I have gone throughout the city and talked to many different groups about this map. And as you can see, the areas in green are the best streets and roads that we have, and they may need some minor repair. The areas in yellow need pretty significant rehabilitation, and the areas in red need reconstruction. And I can assure you that every group we go to, the first thing they do is they look for where they live, and they look for where they work, and they look for the path that they take to get to the places where they go. And it's important to them, and it's personal, and it's something they can see and touch and feel. And as we go, hopefully, to talk to other citizens in this community as we go forward from today, this is what we're talking about. I can speak from our company, NEBCO's standpoint. We're significantly in Northeast Lincoln with up to 1,000 employees, where we provide good-paying jobs, and we want them to have great streets to travel on, and we want commerce to be able to get where it needs to go in a safe manner. As we talk to the citizens about this map, I hope you think about today, not only where you live and where you go, but all the citizens that live on the red streets and the yellow streets, and do they deserve the opportunity to have a little bit better street in front of their home? Well, we've talked a lot about the costs that we have here. If we don't fix many of these things, they just continue to get worse, and they'll cost us more as we move forward. If you think about your automobile, if you didn't change the oil and you didn't service your vehicle and you didn't align your tires and you didn't fix your tire when it fell in that pothole, the useful life of that vehicle wouldn't last very long. And that's what we have to do with our streets. And I know Mickey and her crews have looked at prioritizing streets for repair, but with 5 to 6 to 7% inflation, now is the time to fix some of these streets so that the costs don't exponentially grow in the future. And we already know that we're getting more fuel-efficient vehicles, and that the portion of gas tax that we receive is only going to go down in the future. Well, the most exciting part about this, and a couple of you on the board were on our Lincoln Citizens Transportation Coalition, and several in the audience were helping us with that. But this was 27 people from across the continuum of the city of Lincoln, from about many different professions, many different political persuasions. And we all came together and we spent 5 months studying the issue. We not only studied the condition of the roads, we studied the budget, we studied what the shortfall is, we looked at 14 peer communities. We boarded a bus and traveled through many of these neighborhoods that maybe just because it's not where we live, we don't travel through that area. And we saw streets that are in dire need of repair. Streets that I would say maybe should have been fixed many years ago, but we all understand the priorities and the funding challenges that we face. We looked at those peer communities, and Lincoln spends about $2,500 a lane mile on maintenance and repair, where our peer cities were spending about $10,000 a lane mile. Not only did we look at the funding mechanism, but we also looked at how could we just improve ourselves. How could we improve our design standards? How could we improve our monitoring and our repair? And our coalition came up with 24 different items, and I know you've all been provided with a list of those 24 items and where Mickey is at with addressing those. I think 18 of them we've already made significant progress. I mean, if you look at taking the lane mile width from 12 to 11, that's about $400,000 or $500,000 a mile in savings that we can incur or save. Those ideas that the citizens brought forward are being implemented, but that was only the first step. Those were the first 18. The other items that we brought forward had to relate to funding. There needed to be additional resources allocated to roads. You've probably heard what it costs to do some of these things. Where we talk about preservation and street resurfacing, it's about $600,000 a lane mile. We talk about optimization, about our traffic signals. It's about $300,000 in signalized intersection. And for growth, it's about $12 million a mile for a new 4-lane arterial. So it does cost a significant sum of money to do some of these projects in our city. But we all know where the new streets are at and where the ones that need to be repaired. Well, what did we find was the gap? And this was our charge to look at the numbers, study the numbers, ask the experts. But we found a $21 million deficit in a system preservation and maintenance, and that's per each year. We also found about a $7 million deficit in our system optimization, and that's like signalized intersections. And then we found about a $5 million per year deficit in growing our streets, and that's providing that ability for a family member to look for something on a new lot, build a new home, employ our plumbers, employ our electricians, employ our framers, and build those new homes for our families. As we came to our conclusion, we looked where we could find cost savings. We talked about keeping our good streets good. We need to keep repaired those streets that are in a decent condition today so they'll last us another 10 or 15 years. If we don't take care of them, they're going to prematurely fail. We also looked at those best practices, everything from the lane width to letting private contractors do the curb cuts in the neighborhoods to working with the developers on the geotechnical engineering of the roads to make sure they last longer. It was a very comprehensive study, and I'm very excited that Public Works has already implemented many of these items. But the exciting part of the 5 months was you get down to the last month and you have to talk about money. All of the things that we talked about for 4 months were how do we improve this and how do we change this, but we got down to the point where how do we bridge the gap of that $33 million that we found in the funding gap? 26 million of that 33 was preservation and maintenance. And literally, we sat in our room in our coalition and we talked about property taxes. And you might guess how popular property taxes were as we discussed them in our coalition. And there wasn't a hand to be raised in the room, and it's a very diverse room with many people with different ideas, and nobody wanted to raise their hand and say, let's use property taxes on our citizens, because we know that's a big challenge for all of us. Secondly, we talked about the wheel tax, and it was universally determined by a supermajority vote that our wheel tax was already at a very high level, and it only impacts our current residents. And so then we discussed another option, and that was using the state allowable sales tax as an option for our city. We're allowed under state law to use a half a cent. Our coalition voted by supermajority to recommend a half cent to the mayor and to the council. I know today this proposal is for a quarter cent. It's a very conservative proposal. At 13 million instead of maybe the 20 to 26 million that the coalition recommended. We understand we have to earn the good faith with the citizens of Lincoln. And we think that quarter cent will go a long ways to making a start in that discussion with our Lincoln residents. We also think the discussion today about how that is split, where a part of that, a little over 3 million, goes to new streets, is very important. But also that 75% of it goes to our existing street system. And a majority of that would go to our residential streets, because that's what the coalition defined as what was in the most need of repair. So that's how we solve our gap. We talk about the 13 million annually. One of the big issues that the coalition brought up was all of the people that visit our city and use our city for either commerce or enjoyment or entertainment. The 30% of the sales tax collected is from those non-residents that use our streets. We think that it's a matter of great fairness that the citizens that visit and use the services would also have to pay a very small sum to assist us with maintaining those services as they visit our community. We talked about why not property tax, why not wheel tax. Well, we also talked about our impact fees, and we looked at the peer cities, and we are in the very high range of our peer cities. And our coalition voted not to recommend raising the impact fees because of the impact that that has on new home buyers and those that would hope to build a new home for their family. I would ask you to think today about this proposal in a positive light. It'll be a booster shot for our streets. It's an opportunity to make a good faith effort with $13 million a year to get into our residential neighborhoods and make a difference and help our homeowners, and we think it's a fairness argument where we can have non-residents assist us in paying for that opportunity. With that, I think Mickey has the next slide, and I'd be open to any questions, of course.
New questions now or wait till the end?
Can I just have a quick one to fill in? I have a fill in the blank, because you had mentioned going from 12 foot to 11 foot in the width of the streets equals a savings of, and I didn't get the number written down.
So the savings on that, I think, was about $500,000 a lane mile.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've even upped it to 600 in our recent estimates, so 500 to 600 per lane mile.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman.
All right, so I'm just going to take off after Bob here, but I wanted to give you a quick synopsis of the ballot language. First of all, $13 million annually for a 6-year term, specifically for streets. We're talking about designating this for pavement projects, rehab and reconstruction, curb to curb on existing neighborhood and arterial streets. In all quadrants of the city, we want geographic parity as we deliver this program. No less than 25% will be dedicated to new construction. 1.5% will be dedicated to the North 33rd and Cornhusker Safety Improvement Project, and that's specifically for engineering and preliminary design support. But also, we have a couple of exemptions. No sidewalks, trails, traffic signals, bike lanes, or other non-paving projects will be used funded by this funding stream, and no bonding or debt payments. Continuing on, the project list and oversight, I just want to again reiterate, we're trying to reach projects citywide, but also there's going to be oversight by a committee, a citizens committee. We're calling them ACT, the Advisory Committee on Transportation. This will be mayoral appointed. And we will also program projects in the CIP, just like we always do. So if there's a mid-biennium amendment, we'll bring those projects forward, which includes a public hearing. Those will be fully vetted to the public. There's also an annual report from Lincoln Transportation and Utilities, both to the Oversight Committee and City Council, and we'll do what the state does with its needs assessment and reporting. So what do we want to do? Well, here's the map. We would love to get out there and fix these ugly streets in every corner of our city. These were actually taken in these districts, and this is what we're talking about. We would love to come in, quick fix, hard-hitting, 1 to 2 inch mill and beautiful asphalt overlay so that we can then have streets that Lincolnites deserve. We estimate that we can, over the 6-year period, hit 1,800 blocks of neighborhood street rehab. That quadruples our outputs today, and we would love to be able to deploy that for the community. But with respect to new growth and growing our city, 25% will be dedicated to new growth. And finally, that 1.5 to this very important project, a 33rd and Cornhusker project, to stop problems like these. So project management principles for our department are geographic parity, project coordination and bundling, which I'm happy to answer more questions about, transparency and accountability. And for any questions, you can also, folks can go to the Lincoln on the Move website, and they can submit questions to us online at info@lincolnonthe.move.com.
Thank you. Questions from the council regarding from these two testifiers? Councilwoman Gaylor-Baird.
Just actually a lawyerly question for you.
Oh, sure.
In the language, it says none of the revenues from the additional quarter-cent shall be used for, or shall be spent on a number of things or other non-paving projects, but later under the RTSD clause, it specifies engineering services. It's obviously clear what the intent is, but do they clash, or is this sufficient?
Well, I guess I'd have to defer to the law department, but yes, I mean, our intention is that they are completely separate, and that's a great question. But we will use the RTSD money specifically for prior to construction, because the project won't be built until 2026, so it'll be engineering design specifically for that project, and I'll have to defer to you. Chris, do you want to answer it now, or do you want to answer it in your testimony?
Okay.
Okay.
It can wait.
Yeah? Okay.
Councilman Camp?
Yes, addressing that RTSD, Rural Transportation Safety District, 1.5%. I think before it had been estimated that a quarter-cent sales tax would raise approximately $13 million per year. So 1.5%, that'd be $195,000 per year. So over 6 years, then you're $1.2 million for design costs. What other design costs are you anticipating?
Well, as you know, that project is full of environmental needs as well. We have to do a pretty robust, upwards of $2 million NEPA study. So that's likely to be where these dollars go. We do sort of a cost share with the RTSD to fund that kind of engineering study. And it's very technical, and comprehensive, so.
Ms. Esposito, will there be other people testifying to answer his question too?
Sure, yeah. I mean, as people come up, they'll answer legal questions.
So let's don't lose that question.
Okay.
Are there other, how about we move on to the next, would anyone else like to speak on this agenda item?
Okay.
Part of your presentation, thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, I'm Rick Hoppy, Mayor Byler's Chief of Staff. Thank you for the time. My goal here today is just to review just a little bit of the history of the quarter-cent sales tax and how we got to this point. You'll recall that in April of 2015, the voters of the city decided to move forward on a quarter-cent sales tax to pay for a new radio system, 4 fire stations, and a police station. That was a successful vote, and that tax was ended in October of 2018. It was a successful first trial run of the state authority given to us to increase the sales tax by either a quarter or a half cent. And I think most people across the community are pleased with the results. And as importantly, the elected officials at this dais and the mayor's office kept their word and ended the tax when it was supposed to end. With that in line and with that then the background, that the Transportation Coalition came together and recommended that 20 to 28 million be put into the street system in addition to the 60 million a year we now spend. It set off people looking again at this sales tax issue and how we might utilize the sales tax to fill in this gap. And when this conversation first started, in hope that there would be a vote in November of 2018, there were some divergent opinions on how we do this. I think people were a long ways apart. And why it's very important to bring people together on this issue is the nature of the state statute that gives us this authority. Keep in mind, not only is there a vote of the people to do this, but it requires 5 of the 7 of you to even put it on the ballot. And by the nature of that, that means you have to have broad community consensus in order to get something like this accomplished. In short, as many people as possible have to be on the same page. So when we started this thing out, that wasn't necessarily the case. I think I would tell you accurately that Mayor Beitler felt like we should do a half cent, felt like it should be for the full 10 years allowed by state law, and felt like perhaps we could divert some of that money to public safety needs as well as streets. I think there was significant people in the community that felt like, wait a minute, tax increases are hard enough to put into place as it is. We're not comfortable with those sorts of terms, and we really want to narrow this proposal down so it looks a little bit more like what we did in 2015. After much discussion with council members, with community coalition groups, we got down to a point where we agreed that we could do a quarter cent. There was a belief that it should be for 5 years. There was some restrictions on what the money could be spent on. No longer were we talking about public safety, but we were also talking about what we'd say curb to curb, i.e. concrete is what we intended to fund with these sales tax dollars. The mayor's office and a number of the other people involved felt like these were acceptable terms, but there were still a couple of things hanging out there that many of you are aware of now that are represented today. One of them was the issue of how much this money could be devoted to new construction and the economic development that new construction brings. 2, some sort of freeze on impact fees as a matter of fairness to those in the home building community and people who are buying new homes. If the cost of the home is going up in part because the items in it are going to be more expensive from the sales tax, would it be fair then to go ahead and reduce the or freeze the impact fees as a result? Finally, there was some discussion among many of you about delaying the 14th and Warlick project for a period of years. That's where negotiations kind of stopped. We didn't really have very much going at that point because it didn't seem like we could bridge the gap on all 3 of those issues. And then lo and behold, a few months ago, Councilman Christensen came forward. We had lunch, and he said, look, if you can come up a little bit here on a couple of things that we've talked about, particularly impact fees, I can see myself not worrying about 14th and Warlick. I hope I haven't put words in your mouth. So that started the whole process again. There was a lot of back and forth, the groups involved. But what really kind of sealed the deal is that at one point, the home builders of the community were saying, look, we think 5 years is a fair amount of time to freeze the impact fees. Mayor Beitler said, I would be happy to do that if we could go ahead and get a 6th year of funding for roads, so a $78 million proposal in total. And that seemed to break the logjam, and everyone came together and got behind the proposal, as you will hear from the testifiers behind me. But I think the number one thing to convey to folks is that $78 million is a significant amount to address our roads problems going forward. It'll make roads less expensive to fix in the future once we get the most difficult roads out of the way. And we feel like what was given up on the side of impact fees was fairly small in comparison when you talk about $1.2 million in total for freezing the impact fees from a period of the beginning of 2019 through the 5 years until it expires. So my job today was to remind you that this was a product of a pretty intense negotiation and compromise. I think it's fair to say that no one got what they thought they should all be in the package, that everyone gave something up to the greater good. And that's what we've put in front of you to consider today to put on the ballot in April of this year.
Thank you. Questions? I really feel like I shouldn't ask that. It's going to stymie the... Mr. Connolly,
Chris Connolly, Acting City Attorney. Councilwoman Gaylor Baird, I think to answer your question about the engineering costs, there will be paving, of course, connected with 33rd and Cornhusker. Therefore, there's not going to be an inconsistency, if that is what your concern is.
The concern was just that it says none of the revenues shall be spent on non-paving projects, but clearly but
there's paving
engines
aspects to 33rd and Cornhusker.
Okay. I just wondered if those phrases were contradictory and wanted to see if there was an opportunity to clarify. But if
I don't believe so, but this is your resolution also. But I believe that it's okay the way it is.
But I think part of the reassurance we're providing by the clause 2 is that it's not other things associated with paving that will be covered by this funding. It's strictly concrete.
Well, there's, and to the extent that there's always a little bit of engineering that goes along with even just the curb to curb kind of stuff. And so that's the reason why we're using the 1.5% here on the paving portion as it relates to 33rd and Cornhusker. Okay, Mr. Camp, and I don't know whether you had your question answered or.
Well, I guess if you could elaborate on that, on the design costs and so forth, and how that 1.5% came up, and what other additional costs there might be for the.
Well, and as I'll get to, we're required, of course, to have an interlocal agreement. The amount of 1.5%, I think, was just something that came out in discussions with the RTSD representatives as to what they felt they could use on the project, and so that's exactly what it's going to be spent on. I couldn't tell you that exactly. Roger Feigard is here. I don't know how well he's able to answer all those questions, but yes, there is some, and maybe Mickey can answer.
Yeah, I'd be glad to answer what what we want to put this money to use for. Again, it comes down to the preliminary engineering for the project, as well as a very robust NEPA study for that project, which is a comprehensive environmental look to build the project. And then I just wanted to iterate that there's also oversight by the RTSD interlocal actually has an oversight committee for the expenditure of those funds, and we'll watch that. So Chris can probably talk to you about the members on that committee, but those funds will be vetted through both the RTSD board and this committee.
Now, last week we were presented information on the whole project there and the 3 phases or the 3 elements of it, and one of which had the sub-area that was fairly larger and extensive beyond just the railroad track overpass.
Good. I understand where you're headed with that. These dollars will go to the infrastructure project itself. You're talking about sub-area and corridor plan, and those will be separated.
Is the NEPA study required for just even an overpass over the railroad?
It's required for the RTSD infrastructure project in and of itself. Yeah.
Now, would it be more for that study where we have a larger sub-area plan?
Are you asking if it would be more money if we take into consideration the sub-area plan?
The area that you're proposing now, or at least we were presented last week to study to see what might happen over 5 or 10 years.
The cost that I quoted to you of upwards of $2 million for the NEPA study is necessary for the RTSD, the original RTSD project. So I guess
The overpass.
Yeah, with the overpass
Over the
and
track.
the safety improvement project and all the track improvements, all of that.
Does that increase the cost to go to the larger sub-area plan, clear up to Interstate 80 and Superior?
You know, I don't think so, but I'm trying to understand your question. I think what you're asking, is it more expensive because there's a sub-area plan and corridor study? And I'm saying no. No.
Think it costs any more to have a much larger area?
Well, they're a little bit distinct and distinguished, even though there's synergy between the two studies and in between the two projects. So NEPA is extensive. It's $2 million. It's comprehensive for that entire safety improvement project, and it's going to be $2 million. So the request was to cost share on that particular study. And then if it doesn't come in at that cost, then we would dedicate or devote some dollars to preliminary engineering for the safety improvement project specifically. Even though there's a commensurate corridor study and sub-area plan going on at the same time, it's almost like there's synergy between the two, but for this purpose, we're separating out the safety improvement project costs. Okay.
Thank you. Other questions from Ms. Esposito? Never mind, she's gone back. Mr. Connolly?
Okay. So going on to the interlocal agreement itself with the RTSD, we have a long history of interlocal agreements with the RTSD. It's been around since 1971, and just in the last 10 years, we have 30 or more agreements, most of which are interlocal agreements with the RTSD, and so it makes sense to have this agreement be with someone that we've done a lot of business with. The 33rd and Cornhusker Safety Improvement Project is important to the city and the RTSD for both safety and development reasons, and they've been expanded upon here a little bit. Creating another interlocal arrangement with the RTSD to provide engineering funding furthers the goal of realizing the construction of the 33rd and Cornhusker Safety Improvement Project and is consistent with the goals of street rehabilitation and reconstruction sought by the sales tax increase of 0.25%. These two kind of dovetail together. They are both paving projects, and they are both for vehicle traffic safety is what we're trying to accomplish on both ends, and so this is a good pairing of projects. Every 6 years, the administrative committee that's formed by this interlocal will review the status of the engineering for the 33rd and Cornhusker Safety Improvement Project to assess whether sufficient progress on engineering for the project has been achieved. There's no magic in the 6-year number. The administrative committee will no doubt be watching the funds and monitoring as we go along, but state statute requires that we put benchmarks in, and so we have a benchmark. But it will be reviewed certainly more often than that. Creating an interlocal agreement is a requirement of passage of the sales tax increase. That's right out of state statute. The RTSD will receive not less than 1.5% of the sales tax revenue generated by the increase if approved, and we've discussed that. This agreement is intended to promote the long-term development of unified governance of the 33rd and Cornhusker Safety Improvement Project, which basically means we're trying to have a partnership, again, with the RTSD, and having this interlocal agreement go along with the sales tax increase helps with unifying that governance. And this is right out of the statute also. The interlocal agreement can be terminated upon 6 months' notice to the other party, but cannot be terminated before April 9th, 2019. So assuming the RTSD goes ahead and approves this at their meeting next week, it could start to get organized, but obviously we don't want it to go out of business prior to the approval of the sales tax, or see what happens. It is contingent upon, though, approval of the sales tax increase. Okay, so that is the interlocal agreement. Next, I will move on to the impact rate freeze. On the impact fees, we have a history of freezing the rate increases, and we had one such that went from January of 2008 to began again in January of 2014. So this is not new. It provides relief for the building costs for developers. All impact fee rates would be frozen, not just the arterial streets. The impact fee remains in place, but with no increases for 5 years. So in January 1 of 2024 is when the increases can start again based on inflation, essentially, for the year 2023. The freeze is contingent upon passage of the sales tax increase and adoption of the ordinance imposing the tax by the City Council. Are there any questions on the impact fee freeze? Okay, then last is the sales tax increase itself. This makes it a little easier to read.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Proposal is for an increase of 1/4%. Revenues from sales tax increase will be used for street rehabilitation in existing neighborhoods and of arterial streets, reconstruction of streets in existing neighborhoods and arterial streets, improvements to existing streets to enhance safety, streamline traffic flow, or promote private sector investment, rehabilitation, reconstruction, and improvements to streets in all quadrants of the city, and as was noted by Mickey, not less than 25% to be reserved for construction of new non-residential streets to promote private sector investment. Now there's a second part to this. Revenues from the increase will not be used for sidewalks, trails, traffic signals, bike lanes, and other non-paving projects, as we've discussed. Street projects to be funded from the sales tax increase shall be selected from the CIP with guidance from the Citizen Oversight Committee that Mickey was referring to, that will be selected by the mayor to ensure that the tax revenues are spent fairly, efficiently, and in all quadrants of the city. LTU will provide an annual report to the mayor, city council, and the Oversight Committee. Not less than 1.5% of the sales tax will be used for, again, the engineering services on 33rd and Cornhusker. And last, the sales tax increase will run for a period of 6 years. And again, that's sort of the nuts and bolts of each of the resolutions. And with that, if you have questions about the nuts and bolts, I'll be happy to answer those.
Questions for this testifier? Thank you, Mr. Connolly. Mr. Hoppy, do you have some other? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'm Wendy Birdsall, President of the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, and I will try not to be redundant and as brief as possible. I do want to testify on behalf of putting the sales tax question on the April 9th ballot, also expressing support for the companion resolution, freezing impact fees and increasing, or impact fee increase in the interlocal agreement between the city and the Railroad Transportation and Safety District. I think it's been well shown that our streets are in great need of maintenance and infrastructure improvements, and it is a barrier to our growth. As was also mentioned, the Transportation Coalition came together, attempted to identify numerous areas to increase city funding for streets, taking public input and other recommendations into consideration before crafting their final report. The report found that while funding for the streets has increased since 2010, we're still woefully behind peer cities by a great margin. And increasing transportation revenues through wheel tax impact fees were considered. The Transportation Coalition found that sales tax increase had the most support from the coalition of the groups on the project. The Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, the Realtors Association, Home Builders Association of Lincoln, the Lincoln Independent Business Association, and city reps have met for quite some time and came together in support of the resolution and the current product that is in front of you today, which I think speaks volumes. We all know that Lincoln is a wonderful place to live, but we also know it's a great place to work and visit. We also have shown, the Transportation Coalition has shown that 30% of sales taxes generated in Lincoln come from people that don't live here, people coming in from outside for sporting events, their job, to shop. I'll also tell you, as the oversight of Lincoln Convention and Visitors Bureau, we had a record number of room hotel stays over 2018. We had 110,000, which translates into 3 months of record-setting lodging tax collections in January, March, and June, and these are considered our slow months. And I bring this to you because those folks that will come in to these events, that will come in to shop, that will come into their job, are spending money here. And so if we're collecting sales tax from them, we then can have them help us pay for our road infrastructure. Along with other community leaders, the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce is hopeful that Better Streets for a Stronger Future initiative will help pave the way, no pun intended, but it does work, for our city's prosperity through the years ahead. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of the resolution. I'd like to also introduce Kyle Fisher, with the Lincoln Realtors Association. He has a couple words too.
Yeah, Kyle Fisher, Realtors Association Lincoln. Happy to stand here next to our partners, Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, and testify on behalf of this today. I've said it before this council. Infrastructure is important, roads are important, and they can't come before you and stand before you and talk about themselves. They need advocates, and we're happy to be strong advocates for the benefits of a great transportation network here in Lincoln. Our board, along with our partners, we've passed a formal resolution of support for what's before you today. It's been a very thorough process. We've been honored to be part of it. And I'll agree with our previous speakers, especially Mr. Hoppy. You know, this is the city's chance to earn some trust here, the way it did with the 911 ballot issue, and I have complete confidence that they'll do that. Our entire road network needs work. Residential, arterial, interior, exterior. This is our chance as a community to do something about that finally. We're going to grow, okay? We can't stop that. And our existing road network is going to need repair, and it's going to need replacement. We can't stop that either. There's no winners, there's no losers in this issue. We're one Lincoln. We need to come together. If you are so gracious to put this on the ballot, we need to come together and pass this. We'll do everything in our power as realtors to help you do that. And again, thankful to be part of the process with our partners.
Thank you both.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming forward. Mr. Mayor?
Members of the council, thank you so much for giving me just a few moments of your time. I know it's going to be a long day. I'll try to be very quick, but I wanted to be here today for this great moment in time for Lincoln. The city council has brought us two great moments of time in a half a dozen occasions in the last few years, and this is one more instance where Lincoln can move ahead in a very significant and meaningful way. It's in the same league as Pinnacle Bank Arena, as the South Beltway, as the prior sales tax vote for public safety. All of those affected different areas of our lives, but I suggest to you that to the common person on a day-to-day basis, this one may be the biggest of all, because this one will affect each and every one of them in many, many ways in many, many areas of the city as they go about their daily lives from day to day. It's, when you talk about roads, of course, you talk about a lot of money. $13 million a year is what we're talking about here for 6 years, $78 million altogether. It will improve the roads significantly, particularly the roads in established neighborhoods. It's interesting, though, and I want to point out to you that the community interest groups have whittled and shaped this matter so that the actual amount of money being advocated and asked to be put on the ballot by you is less than 30% of the amount that was recommended originally by the Citizens Committee. So it's not like we just took their recommendations and ran with them. We took their recommendations as a starting point, and I don't think there has been another proposition in this city that has been shaped to such an extent by so many different interest groups. It's truly a piece of work of the community left now only for your work. As I've gone about the city in the last few years, and increasingly as we come closer in time to today, I have heard more and more about the streets. The existing streets, the shortage of funds for new roads, altogether, the number one thing I hear from citizens now are concerns about the streets in one way or another. They want more maintenance to avoid the potholes. I happened to notice you had another pothole suggestion to you earlier today, even. They want faster progress on economic development issues. People building neighborhoods in the new areas of town need to get that work done. Altogether, We just need to get a greater network of roads and a better taken care of network of roads. Transportation is the foundation of so many things we hope to accomplish in the community, our economic growth, our job creation. Much of that is tied, of course, to infrastructure, particularly the infrastructure for streets. The community is a safer place with fewer accidents and injuries. When we invest in streets, our quality of life is raised altogether by a well-maintained street system. Finding a solution to the concerns of all involved has been the toughest challenge of this administration to date. Mickey's presentation makes clear, Bob's presentation makes clear that streets are expensive to build and expensive to maintain. Cutting City Hall programs does not even begin to scratch the surface of the financial needs for our streets. That's why the bilateral commission, bipartisan coalition is recommending that Lincoln Streets consider a 6-year quarter-cent sales tax to fix them. The proposal before you represents what I think we're beginning to understand and formulate as the Lincoln Way. It's a series of consensus and compromises. Roy Christensen, I thank you very much in this instance for your sincere work in bringing people together on this. Staff members, the rest of you on certain occasions, together with Roy, have been instrumental in piecing together the overall coalition that now exists, I think, to make great progress on our streets. And with the consensus that has been built, this does indeed become a once-in-a-generation opportunity to solve what is now the #1 problem before us. If the voters pass the initiative in April, we will quadruple the number of neighborhood street improvements and make street repairs less costly and more efficient in the future. Instead of reacting and addressing expensive street problems, we will be proactively addressing streets before they become so expensive to fix. I hear every day from constituents across the city about our streets. They want actions on the streets. They want it now. And I encourage you to continue to work together with each other and with the administration to make this happen and to give democracy a chance to work by opening the issue to a vote of the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councilman Camp.
Well, I think the mayor and I are kind of in a position where we're riding off into the sunset after May, and I'm wondering what advice we can give to future council members and administration mayors that as they prepare budgets, that we make sure on the rest of the budget, since this would just be a $13 million a year injection, whereas we have tens of millions of dollars of needs in infrastructure, how can we advise them to ensure the rest of the budget and the other wheel tax funds and state tax funds and so forth are not diluted, and that those also go to help solve our emerging infrastructure problems?
That's a broad question, Senator, and I think maybe the shortest and maybe the best answer I can give is that they should reelect people like you who take a serious and effective and critical look at everything taken all together.
Councilman Camp, thank you for your question. I'm a little concerned. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for your response. That was, yeah. Well, I think we can all work together and work a little harder. Mr. Hoppy, was there anyone else for the presentation portion?
I think it's a free-for-all now.
Okay. So if you've been following on our agenda, we're discussing 3 issues: the railroad transportation, the freeze on impact fees, and the sales tax on the ballot. Now we're in a public hearing portion. People in the chamber may come forward to speak. Please remember to tell us your name, address, and where you're speaking in favor of or in opposition to, and which of the 3 items you're talking about, so we can kind of keep track of what's going on. Mr. Antonello, thank you for coming forward.
Hi, my name is Dustin Antonello. I'm representing the Lincoln Independent Business Association. Our address is 620 North 48th Street, Suite 205 here in Lincoln, and we're here speaking in favor of all three proposals on the ballot. I mean, on the agenda. So, LIBA supports putting the quarter-cent sales tax increase for street rehabilitation and construction on the April 9th ballot. Reliable street conditions are vital to the economic well-being of Lincoln. Residents depend on well-maintained streets to get to and from their jobs, school, and local businesses. The Citizens Transportation Coalition recently identified a significant gap in the funds needed to repair Lincoln's existing street network and support future street construction. The sales tax will help close this gap by providing an additional $13 million annually in revenue for streets. These additional funds could go a long way toward fixing rundown streets, repairing potholes, and constructing new streets. LIBA believes a small sales tax increase is a fair and equitable way to pay for additional street funding. Commuters and visitors who frequent Lincoln do not currently have to bear the cost of maintaining Lincoln streets. Since 1/3 of Lincoln's sales tax is paid for by visitors to our city, the financial burden for street maintenance will be extended to all users of Lincoln streets and not just fall on the shoulders of Lincoln's residents. The proposed ballot initiative also includes important safeguards to prevent funds from the sales tax from being used beyond its intended purpose. The ballot language ensures the additional funds will be used only for curb-to-curb street construction. LIBA also supports freezing the impact fees for 5 years. An impact fee freeze will help offset the increases to construction costs that will result from the sales tax increase, which will help keep new housing prices in check. Developers will still be required to pay all impact fees. The freeze simply stops increases to the fees for 5 years. Most importantly, putting this proposal on the ballot ultimately leaves it up to the voters to decide whether it's a good idea to raise the sales tax to pay for better street conditions. Adding this to the ballot will allow Lincolnites to directly weigh in on an important issue that impacts all citizens. Thank you. I'd be happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you. We have questions for this, Mr. Antonello, for this testifier? Thank you very much. As the next testifier approaches, I'd like to say something I didn't say earlier. We will be observing the 5-minute per testifier rule. That means at 4 minutes you'll hear a buzzer go off, and I'll remind you you have 1 minute left, and then you'll try to wrap up your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Ann Post. I'm an attorney with Baylor Evans Law Firm. I'm here today on behalf of the Home Builders Association of Lincoln in support of the package of amendments that is before you. So first, we'd like to thank the coalition, the group of people that got together to shape this package that's before you today. The home builders, HBAL, approached the idea of a sales tax increase with caution. The organization recognizes the critical need for new road construction in Lincoln to continue Lincoln's positive growth. However, we were also concerned that a sales tax which applies to the inputs into new home construction, we wanted to make sure it wouldn't become another barrier to housing affordability in Lincoln. Therefore, this package strikes a balance. It dedicates funds to roads as needed, necessary, but it also helps to mitigate some of the impact of that increased sales tax on new home construction. So when new homes are built in Lincoln, it increases Lincoln's property taxes. This increases tax revenues to Lincoln because it increases the valuation of that property. It also helps bring people to Lincoln, those 70% of people that help pay this sales tax in Lincoln for new roads. And now with this measure in place, the construction of each new home will generate substantial sales tax that's going to be contributed directly towards Lincoln's roads and directly towards sustaining and growing our community. So with that, I'd like to ask if I would take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Post. Questions from the council?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm going to try and keep this short and not read my letter that I sent you. I'm Mike DeKalb, that's D-E-K-A-L-B. I was a member of the task force that resulted in these reports. It's kind of nice to see a report that actually moves on to trying to get it done, and I thank the coalition and Roy Christensen for putting together a package to move this forward. So being a planner all these years, I saw a lot of plans, getting things done's another thing. So I appreciate that. To keep this really short, as a member of the Citizens Coalition, I wore several hats. One of those hats was trying to represent neighborhoods. And I just want to bring to you the point that a key all the way through this was taking care of what we've got. Essentially, all of us here, all of those that are going to vote, are residents of Lincoln. Those that are here today, we're taking care of what we've got. Our residential neighborhoods, healthy, vibrant, well taken care of neighborhoods are very important to the quality of life in Lincoln. I was thinking the other day, I got my my tax assessment. The assessor thinks it's worth an awful lot. But I was thinking, you know, if that road out in front was paved, really nice, it would be worth even more. But you think the flip side is that adds value to those existing homes that people are buying and selling for probably 90-some% of our neighborhood. I want to give credit to the process where we're assessing the need, nailing down the cost, and then looking at alternative sources. I think you had a good presentation on that already. I think we've come to the consensus bottom line of the best way to try and pay for this. One last point I want to make is that, thanks to Public Works giving me this number, we have 1,200 miles of residential center lane roads. It's not lane miles, so a 5-lane road is 5 lane miles. Residential streets are usually 2. Center lane road is like you see on a map when you see all the lanes of the streets. We've got 1,200 miles of residential roadway. That's 63% of our center lane roadway in Lincoln, Nebraska. That's most of the streets, not the lane miles, but most of the streets are in our existing residential neighborhoods. So I would like you to support this. I hope it's targeted to, or a good chunk is targeted to residential neighborhoods. And I would suggest, I know it's not on there, I know it's an iffy question to add any amendments to it, but it really would be nice if in some way you could make clear that a significant chunk of the funds raised would go to the existing residential neighborhoods in the city of Lincoln. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeKalb. Questions for this testifier? Thank you again. Would anyone else like to speak?
Yes, good afternoon, Council. This is Anthony Dirks with representing American Council of Engineering Companies, ACEC, Nebraska. And I will be brief as well, as most of the points have already been hit a couple of different times. But I guess as engineers, we get really concerned about the condition of the pavement and recognizing how critical the timeliness of the strategy is, and when it's applied, making sure that the right strategy is applied at the right time. You heard the analogy of the car before, and maintain the car, and if we can't do the service to the car at the right time, soon it becomes repair, soon it becomes replacement. And the same thing applies to the pavement. So that's really our primary concern. We know that the streets in Lincoln are of the utmost importance to the mobility to get kids to and from school safely, get folks in and out of work safely, making sure that that system remains reliable. That is really the backbone of our infrastructure. And so I just, on behalf of ACEC, Nebraska, want to express our support for this initiative and hope that it finds a way to the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for this testifier? Mr. Dirks? Would anyone else in the chamber like to speak to this agenda item? Hi, welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Shelburne. I am the State Director for Americans for Prosperity here in Nebraska. Our address is P.O. Box 82862, Lincoln 68501. First, I'd like to commend the committee who did the research and you guys for recognizing that some of our streets in Lincoln do need some work. However, that being said, we would disagree on how you want to fund this project. Each of you were elected by your constituents to represent their interest in making Lincoln a strong and vibrant community. Taxing your constituency every time you have a need is not the way to do that. It was less than a year ago that I stood before you and testified against the creation of the JPA, which, fast forward, you were able to somehow find the funding between the city and the LPS to provide those needs without creating another taxing authority on the constituency in this city. Now you are asking for your constituents to dig deeper into their pockets with a 1/4-cent sales tax increase for the next 6 years to pay for the roads projects. Before you put this to a vote of the people, I would encourage you to be totally transparent and honest with the people. Lincoln residents deserve better than more and more tax increases. Mr. Caldwell mentioned earning the good faith of the taxpayer. I would agree, that needs to happen. When you look at the fact that the city of Lincoln has increased funding for roads by 71% since 2010, and under Mayor Beitler, our wheel tax has increased over 30%, and the wheel tax was created to fund our roads, to take care of our roads. I have to ask you, where has all that money gone? Especially when this project and this commission says that there's over 50% of our roads in need of repair or needs addressing. Where have we spent that money? This proposal aims to bring in $13 million a year. That is less than you guys were asking for with the JPA, and yet that money cannot be found in existing budget. Let me close by encouraging you to look at the big picture. Not only have we increased wheel tax, we have had money coming in for roads from the Build Nebraska Act. We have had additional money coming in from increased fuel taxes. But yet we need another tax in order to do this. It's not just a quarter-cent sales tax that the citizens of Lincoln have to be concerned with at this point. There are several measures being proposed in the legislature that could potentially put a half-a-cent sales tax on every citizen in the state. So if both measures pass, you are looking at a 3/4-cent sales tax increase on the citizens of Lincoln. You have to look at the big picture. Lincoln does not have a revenue problem. We have a spending and prioritizing problem. We need to do what every household in this city does, and we need to plan for these big expenses. And if I listened correctly to the presentation, there's a $33 million deficit for roads. This barely covers a little over a third of that a year. We need to learn to prioritize, and we need to make it a priority and budget for it and plan ahead. Thank you so much, and I would take any questions.
Any questions for this testifier? Ms. Shelburne, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Hey, Council. My name is Joe Murray. I live at 24395 South 68th Street. Not to confuse you, that is outside the city of Lincoln. I live right next to the Norris School. But I conduct business, shop, and attend church in Lincoln. My wife has worked in downtown Lincoln for over 30 years. She commutes every day. I have a son that commutes to Lincoln every day. So we pay our share of sales tax to the city, as well as supporting local business. I bring words of caution and maybe some advice from the council as a country boy to my city colleagues. As a property owner, that whether it is in the city, county, or state, we are fed up with the exorbitant high taxes on our property. They're some of the highest in the country. The latest assessments see a raise in valuations on whole of more than 10%, with many seeing 40, 50, or higher percentage increases on property in Lincoln. The city of Lincoln may not set valuations, which are set by the state statute and assessed by the county assessor at or near market value as established by statute. However, the city does spend its share of property tax dollars, sets your levy, and has the power to deliver much-needed property tax relief. The city should give back at least a portion of the windfall that exceeds the 4.9% increase that was projected in your current budget for 2020. You have already budgeted with expectation of less money, so it is not a burden on city services to give it back to the beleaguered property owners. Standing by itself, the proposal before the council to put a quarter-cent sales tax increase to the voters seems like a reasonable, narrowly tailored proposal to address much-needed improvement to our roads. It reminds me of the very reasonable bond issue that was proposed in my neighborhood by the Norris School in the fall of 2017. The school made a very compelling argument in favor of it, and there was no formal opposition. But for the first time in the history of the Norris School, a bond issue was defeated, because we were getting the same type of massive assessment hits that property taxers and owners in Lincoln have just experienced. Voters said enough is enough. Learn to live within your means. Without this massive double-digit increase in property valuations, this targeted sales tax increase would likely pass. But without some property tax relief to offset the double-digit valuation increases, don't be surprised if this proposal is rejected by the voters. I put this question to over 30 people I know in the last few days that own property here in Lincoln, and every one of them said they would not vote for the sales tax increase if the city did not deliver property tax relief. I encourage you to give this much-needed property tax relief before putting the sales tax before voters. If you do not, I would encourage everyone to vote against this proposal. It will be hard for the voters to believe you will keep your promise on a sales tax increase, and it certainly will be into question whether you have any interest of being, if you have any interest of being frugal with the rest of your resources of tax revenue. There is reason for mistrust, as we've seen money pop up for wants while needs go unfunded for at least 2 decades, which is why you're now asking for more sales tax dollars. As taxpayers, we also have to be worried about massive tax increase proposals that have been introduced in the legislature this year. That, if it would pass, would increase the burden on many beyond what this proposal does. Many, if not all of those, could be defeated, but until they are, it is hard to be eager to vote for increases in taxes. My humble request today is to have some mercy on the property tax owners of this city by giving them back some of their hard-earned money from the windfall you will be getting from the much larger than expected value increases. It is misleading to ask for more in sales taxes, even no matter how targeted it is, if you can't give a good faith by giving some of our property tax relief. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Murray? Mr. Murray, thank you for your testimony. Would anyone else like to speak to these 3 agenda items? If you do wish to testify, if you would move forward and sit in one of the seats in the first 2 rows, that would be respectful of all the people in the chamber and everyone's time.
Jane Kinsey with Watchdogs of Lincoln Government. This idea is ridiculous. The whole financial situation in Lincoln is like an episode out of the Twilight Zone. If you remember that TV program, which, by the way, is being resurrected, it presented events that were out of the realm of logical reality. So is this idea. We are extremely disappointed that these leadership people and groups have come up with this idea. Property owners have just received outlandish reassessments that will lead to increased taxes. Sales tax revenue is down due to lower retail sales and the closing of at least 5 businesses, 2 more big ones to close soon. If visitors can't pay sales taxes if there aren't businesses here to take their money. The council approves huge TIFs for wealthy developers, and the TIF law lowers the revenue that the city is going to have from taxes. So now they want us to approve your raising a sales tax. We know the TIF is being abused. The legislature knows the city is abusing it. And this idea of doing away with impact fees is about to developers. If people want to buy homes, they're going to have to sacrifice and save, just like people have done over many, many years, and not expect to be able to do it by getting a lower price for their purchase. The city leaders spend huge amounts of money downtown for art, bike lanes, and bikes that disrupt traffic and are used by only a small percentage of Lincoln citizens. Trolleys, and now they're talking about buying scooters for people when over half the population is overweight and needs to walk more. How sensible is that? The last ballot revenue questions were misleading to the voting public. It wanted money to upgrade 9/11 and fire stations. And what did they do? They have extra money and they come up with buying fire trucks. So, and before that, we had the arena question for a ballot question for an arena that led to the West Haymarket development, which has encroached all over downtown. It may be beautiful, but was it honest to the public? How can the public trust a ballot question? Because the powers that be will do what they want with it. Now, because of non-essential frills, the council wants Lincolnites to give them money for basic needs like decent streets outside of downtown, which we needed to have in the first place. Get real, ladies and gentlemen. Wake up and realize that people are tired of having the general public is tired of having its desires not listened to, and they will revolt. This resolution should be voted down, and you should find other possibilities to take care of streets. It was mentioned before, the wheel tax. It's a good question. Where is the wheel tax money? Where is some of the other money that has been spent on these beautification ideas that should go to taking care of streets? 56th and Van Dorn South is terrible. I have called twice to ask when this will be repaired, and it has not been repaired.
Thank you,
so
Ms. Kinsey.
are we listening to what the public has to say?
Ms. Kinsey, thank you very much. Next testifier, please.
Russell, excuse me, Russell Miller, 341 South 52nd Street. Basically, I'm opposed to this sales tax resolution unless the ballot could be changed so that at least 70% of the sales tax revenue guaranteed by this tax shall be used only for the purpose of rehabilitation of residential streets and no other purpose. The next paragraph talks about what happened to the wheels tax and how it's divided up and how, in essence, in round numbers, residential streets rehabs got 15%, new street construction got 35%, and then there's a category called residual, which is 50%. The idea that 50%, it could go anywhere. It could go into street rehabs, it could go into new constructions. However, you look at any of the CIP budgets, all of the residual has always gone to new construction. None of it has ever gone to street rehabs. So basically, and we're being promised with this thing that we're going to have money for street rehabs. Your track record says no. That's why we need some kind of a, in writing, you know, Americans have to put things into writing because things change. And this coming April, May, we're going to have a change. And several people are sitting there in front of me. We're going to have a change of the mayor. We don't know what the new people are going to prioritize. This is our chance to make sure that 70% of this tax will go to excuse me, residential street rehab and nothing else. Enough said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Questions for Mr. Miller? Would others in the chamber like to speak to these three agenda items?
Hello, my name is Robert Way, Robertway. I live at 801 Elevado Avenue, Lincoln, Nebraska. There's a lot of items here because we have three major pieces of legislation, and I have 5 minutes to discuss them. That being said, I'm going to take some of my time because he's in the council and he's done such an amazing job, and we all owe him a debt of thanks to thank the mayor for 12 years of excellent leadership. The city's completely transformed, and anybody who doesn't see that hasn't looked at an aerial map. And personally, I think he deserves a lot of credit. I do have a few concerns about the proposed amendments. I would start with how, after we get the money, it's distributed. Why do we have to have an additional citizen committee to determine where the roads are? We have a selected citizen committee to determine where the roads are. It's elected by the citizens. I'm standing in front of it. I don't understand why you take a huge chunk of something people really care about and put it in another department where I don't know if they'll have the same access. So I don't understand that at all. So that's one of my concerns. Second concern, I'm not a big fan of freezing the impact fees. And there's some good reasons for it. I have a counter proposal. It seems the concern is you would like to give the people who build the houses a situation where they continue to be profitable. That makes sense to me. So why not add the top 10 construction materials to the non-taxable items for the city government? We don't tax food because people need it. We could not tax cement, construction wood, aggregate, roofing materials, plumbing materials, steel and metal products, electrical materials, glass for doors and windows, paint for interior and exterior of housings, and building siding. This would take something, instead of just being directed to one group of people, this would be available to everyone. And while it would cost the same, nobody's mentioned yet, $1.2 million that the freeze is estimated to cost us yearly, unless my numbers are wrong, that would spread that to anybody. And I think, though I don't have the staff to make it, I think over 10 years, you might see a tax increase because people would now be incentivized to do home repairs. Landlords would be incentivized to do maintenance on their property, which would increase your property tax base. So, and it comes down to, I really don't understand how this went. I read the report. Oh, I'm going to say one other thing before I run out of time. They talked about different ideas being discussed in front of them. There was some talk about a vote to increase impact fees. I did not find that in the report. What was not discussed as another funding source, which got wide support, was a progressive wheel tax. That wasn't mentioned in the thing. I got a few seconds left. No, guess I don't. I got a minute left.
You have 1 minute left. Yeah.
Politics. I like it. I do it. And the best thing to do is to make sure whatever you want has to get done right away. And whatever the other person wants is really, really bad. This might be a good idea, but I don't understand the urgency of this idea. The only urgency I can see is there's a deadline to get on the ballot. I don't think, even though we've had many smart people who are in this room weigh in on this, I don't know if it's everyone in the community has weighed in on this. I'm sure there's a lot smarter people than me, and I've had to talk to people like Russell Miller to even get up to speed on this, because the workings of city government are very complex. As I only have a few seconds left, one thing I have heard before, what I would like to repeat, is I would like to understand where that 50% of the wheel tax has been going, because I think that's a legitimate question.
Thank you, Mr. Way.
Richard Howerson, 6311 Inverness Road. First, I use Warlock or that intersection every day, and you can delay that if you want. It won't bother me a bit for a personal deal. Second, they've been talking about wheel tax. There's an article in the Journal Star Sunday about the wheel tax and how many, almost $19 million. Well, other cities, or many other cities in Nebraska that don't have any wheel tax. And they somehow managed to get their streets fixed without an additional sales tax. What are they doing right that we're not doing? That struck me. They said there are major cities that don't have a wheel tax, and they managed to get by. Another thing, well, they mentioned about the out-of-towners paying the tax. Well, that's true, but the family of six pays that. If you have a family of six, you're paying that sales tax every day of the year. They're coming in once or twice a year for basketball tournament or whatever, and they're paying once or twice. So it's going to affect Lincoln citizens a lot more than the out-of-towners. Secondly, the main thing, the transparency, the interlocal agreement. Okay, you say, it has been said several times, this is all for paving. Nothing else, all for paving. But, then we come here and say, but, we're spending a significant amount of money to our SCZ for non-paving issues. Again, that's a lot of neighborhood streets that could be paved with that money. I know you have to have an agreement with them, but I don't know where they came up. Maybe you can negotiate less money. Because like I think Mr. Miller said, if the neighborhood, again, it's not in writing, I think the neighborhoods are going to come on the short end of the stick with this deal. So I say, again, that's the main thing too. My main objection there is, again, we're saying that on one hand, everything's for paving, but then on the other hand, not everything is for paving. And again, we're talking a significant amount of dollars. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howerson. Others in the chamber would like to speak on these three agenda items? Was that pause long enough? I think that was long enough.
More staff questions?
Certainly.
Those are appropriate during the voting session.
Pardon?
Point of order, staff questions are appropriate during the voting session.
Okay, well, it has to do with the questions that were raised by some of the citizens.
Yep.
So.
Well, I think probably we should do a rebuttal for the presentation portion.
Yep.
And maybe we can slip them in.
I bet we were going to say the same thing, but why don't you go ahead first?
Well, no, why don't you go first?
Okay. First of all, behind me every step of the way. Thanks so much. First off, I want to clear up just a little bit about financing and the wheel tax. We've had a couple people testify here today about why isn't the wheel tax significant enough to cover our street needs. It's important to understand that we have a budget of about $60 million a year on streets, and that's all aspects of the program, about $60 million a year. The Transportation Coalition said that was about $30 million short of where we needed to be. The wheel tax in its current form at $74 a vehicle generates $18 million a year. It generates less than a third of what we have to spend at the level we are now. It is important to also know that those dollars by ordinance can only be spent on streets. They're not going anywhere else. They are going to streets. That was one piece. We had some very good testimony in regard to the property revaluation. I just want to make sure that the public and the council, who is probably already aware of this, knows that there is kind of a timing issue here. You can't lower the levy whenever you want. It comes during a very specified time in the fall as part of the budget. We can't lower it now. The vote that we're asking you to take right now either has to happen in April or May of this year, or it has to wait till November of 2020. The way the state law was drafted, unfortunately, took out the possibility of having a primary election during an even year. It was drafted more for cities having even year elections, and they wanted to make sure there was pretty good turnout. So you keep that in mind here, that if the rate of inflation on these projects continues to go at the pace it is, and you've delayed this project or this vote in the neighborhood of 19 months, you'll be adding considerable costs. All right, what did I leave out?
Well, I just wanted to give you an illustration of, you know, sort of the cost of doing nothing. I'm going to put this on the Elmo. And I assure everyone on this council that wheel tax dollars have been used for transportation purposes. By code, we are obligated to only spend wheel tax on the system itself. There's 14% that is dedicated to neighborhood streets, about 35% dedicated to arterials and new construction, and the 50% that is dedicated to, that are more flexible, that we dedicate to O&M. But this is really, following the coalition's findings, this is what we're looking at. That red dotted line that runs through the middle of that graph are our revenues at $60 million a year. And I hate that streets are expensive. I wish they were more affordable. But infrastructure, which is so critical to safety, to mobility, to moving around our city, getting anywhere you need to go, to access education, healthcare, a job, taking your kids to school, it is costly. So this is the projection out to 2040, that if we don't close this gap now and avoid some major expense later, we're looking at real problems. So I just wanted to share that with you, along with the code, the codified legal language that requires us to spend wheel tax on transportation.
Would you do the wheel tax number again?
18 million annually is what we generate. Our total budget is right around 60 million.
So we spend 60 million, 18 million of that is wheel tax.
Thank you for clarifying that, if I wasn't clear.
Yeah. I think Councilwoman Lamb has also had some questions.
I do.
Councilman S. Christensen, would you pointed out earlier that.
So let me point this out.
Yeah.
If you're asking questions of these testifiers, that's great. But if you're asking questions of also to different staff members, that's only appropriate during the voting session, so we don't have staff questions now and during the voting session.
Okay, I'll ask them of these guys. Thanks. All good, thanks.
Mr. Hoppy, I think you're still up.
Questions?
Okay. I think she's going to take her bite of the apple now.
Sneak away, cut. All right.
I saw
Did not do that very well.
So you brought up the numbers for the wheel tax, and one of the things that the mayor said when he came up that I'd like to clarify is he had said that by passing this quarter cent sales tax that we put on the ballot and it passes, generating $13 million a year, that the money spent on residential rehab or improvements would be quadrupled. So does that mean right now that this city has only been spending $3.2 million on residential streets?
I'm gonna let. That's a little over my pay grade. I'm gonna let Mickey handle that one.
Okay. So we get about annual per year about 70 blocks of residential. That's an average, and that's on using wheel tax on neighborhood streets. And so when we talk about quadrupling the number, we would be able to, with this money devoted to neighborhood streets. The majority of those funds to neighborhood streets, we could get upwards of 300 blocks per year completed, especially because we're mobilizing in quadrants, right? We're hiring contractors to do specific mobilizations in quadrants. So we won't be moving them around the city. So we hope to get some economies of scale just by bundling those pavement projects in residential areas specifically. And so on the Elmo, actually we've been spending 2.8. That's what's devoted, 2.8 million or 14.86% to neighborhood streets. And again, these percentages are codified in the wheel tax law. So that 18.9 million on that pie graph in the upper right corner is wheel tax. And those are the distributions to each of those. So
When you
2.8
say
annual.
By law, you mean the percentage that the council decided, 50% residual and the percentage towards residential and so forth.
So the state improvement vehicle tax, sorry, the city's street improvement vehicle tax, it's in code, in the Lincoln Municipal Code, and it actually spells out those percentages.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the wheel tax, though, the residual could have been going to residential, and it hasn't been.
And no, that's not the case. In the past, that has been diversified. The residual is flexible money, so it doesn't have to necessarily go to neighborhood streets, doesn't have to necessarily go to arterial streets. In the past, it has been used on major projects. It has been used on neighborhood streets. It's been sort of flexible. What we did do in the last budget year, following the coalition's findings, where the coalition raised this concern, if I'm paying a wheel tax, I'm a user of this system, I want that wheel tax going to existing streets. And I want it to be citywide. I don't want it just going to one project in one quadrant. I want to see it deployed across the board, across the city. And so in the budget, we decided as a city to make sure that that 50% was devoted citywide to existing streets. And in the budget, 2018-19 and 19-20, we have devoted all of that to pothole patching. We have about 40,000 potholes per year. Asphalt and concrete replacement, street sweeping, traffic signals and signs operations, emergency operations and traffic control, as well as snow removal. So we can say with certainty that people who are paying that user fee in the city for wheel tax, we are putting those dollars back on the existing system.
And so I understand that's about 8 to 10 million a year going forward.
10 million. Mm-hmm.
So that brings me to the question, though, because you said traffic and one of the signals, and one of the things that was talked about in the report was a gap of $7 million a year for system optimization, which include traffic signals.
Right.
But one of the things that's part of the ballot language, as I understand, is that it won't, the sales tax will not include any of that, any traffic signals, right?
Right. We will not be devoting any of the sales tax dollars to traffic signals or signs.
But you'll be able to pay for it out of what's been moved from the wheel tax into O&M.
A lot of our strategy with respect to traffic signals and signs and optimization projects is to reap savings that we've talked about in the cost-saving measures. That $7 million is actually a gap that currently exists that we don't have a funding mechanism for. We'll do what we can to maintain as best as we can. But in that area, we are going to be mining those 24 recommendations for as much cost savings that we can get out of there to pay for signals and signs.
Thank you. And I think I just had a couple other questions that I wrote down, and if I can locate them real quickly, thank you. No, I think that'll do it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for these two?
Yeah,
Mr.
actually,
Hoppe, you're Councilwoman Gaylor-Baird.
I think some context for the overall city budget is helpful in discussions like these. And when you look at the general fund budget of about $200 million, can you talk to us about the largest departments and what their budgets are?
Sure. The general fund budget is in the $190 million to $200 million range, and as everyone is reminded, about 70% of those revenues come from sales tax and property taxes. It's important to note that I think 54% at the last go-around of that budget is devoted to public safety. 911, LFR, LPD, and our share of the court's costs, etc. Those are the really big numbers. And if you look at it from the perspective of what prioritization goes forward, after that, you really are now talking about the big numbers being in parks, in libraries, in health, although much of health's budget is federally and state oriented, and you get some money from the county. So if you really are thinking about taking $13 million out of $190 million, which I think is in the neighborhood of 6% of the general fund budget, you're taking a large segment of from libraries, from the Parks Department, because those are only the real places with general fund dollars of any significant amount Star Tran falls into that category too.
Well, and the Parks General Fund budget is in the neighborhood of, it looks
You're
like
gonna, I was going to say 10.
11 million.
Okay, well, I was in the ballpark.
I mean, it's just helpful to understand that you'd actually be generating more than the entire parks budget with this.
I think that's an excellent point, that if you were moving from that
You take
city
public
prioritization
safety.
piece, going backwards up our list, it's online in the mayor's office, you're talking about the typical things you're talking about: library hours, pools, parks maintenance. As you point out, the entire parks budget is less than the $13 million that we're talking about here.
It's helpful to, I think, as an answer to the assertion that somehow this money is easily available elsewhere in the budget.
Other questions for these two? Thank you very much. Would anyone else? I think we've already gone through everybody and the rebuttal. I think we probably need a minute. How about we take a short recess, about 5 minutes? And we confer a little bit. We're moving into recess until, let's go with 10, make it 5 o'clock straight up. That makes it easier to keep. We will reconvene at 5 p.m. Yep, there's the camera back. We'll call the city council meeting for February 4th back into session. And Teresa, I think we just finished up with the public hearing on those resolutions.
Yes, so we can vote on these items. Item 5A was the report of new and pending claims against the city for January 1st through the 15th, introduced by Christensen.
So moved.
Second.
You have a motion by Councilman Christensen and a second by Councilman Eskridge. Discussion of pending claims?
We do have a motion to amend number 1.
And that was introduced by?
It hasn't been
Okay.
introduced yet. And it is on line 12 under denied claims to change the amount of the Windstream claim from unspecified to $8,372.12.
I'd like to second that motion.
I think, wait, hang on, yeah. Who's moving, who's seconding?
Amend number 1.
Okay, so it's motion by Councilwoman Gaylor Baird, second by Councilwoman Raybold. Discussion? Seeing no discussion, we're going to vote now on the motion to amend.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
And now back to the original motion.
Wait, I'd like to make a motion that we approve a claim for Carol Schroeder in the amount of $1,000.
Second.
You have a motion by Councilwoman Raybold and a second by Councilwoman Gaylor Baird to approve one claim against the city in the amount she specified. Discussion? Councilwoman, would you like to speak to your motion?
I'd like to say the city has somewhat rigid standards about making sure that we respond timely. And in this case, Ms. Schroeder did notify the city on numerous occasions about a problem tree, and the city did try to respond timely. Unfortunately, that damage did occur, and she has reduced her request from $2,200.62 to $1,000, which represents her deductible. And I think that's fair.
Additional discussion? Hearing none. Teresa, I'm sorry to put you in the spot, but we have a motion to remove that item from the claims against, to
We're
pay.
approving the claim of Carol Schroeder for $1,000.
Backwards. Thank you. And we're ready to call the roll on
Okay,
that, right?
Eskridge?
Voting in support of the amendment, the change, right?
Correct.
Yes.
A yes vote would mean we agree to pay.
Correct.
No, you're moving it to an approved one, and then you'll vote on the main motion.
Correct, correct.
This is
Yes.
just amending what's before.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
We just voted to remove that from the denied list.
Put it on the approved.
No, the motion was to approve the claim of Carol Schroeder in the amount of $1,000.
We can't do it that way. We had to amend the main motion on the floor, which is the claims. And so this put it in at the approved side.
Mr. Connolly, would you help us for a moment, please?
Her claim is listed under the denied.
Yes.
But this moved it to the approved.
The motion was to pay it, though, as a $1,000 claim. That was the motion. And so you can reconsider and withdraw that and move it to, if you wish to do it that way. Otherwise, the motion was approved as made.
And that kind of automatically moves it. Would that be fair to say? Or is
Yes.
this?
I mean, it has the same impact. I'm not sure it follows the typical process that we have followed in the past.
Mr.
We
Councilman
can't
Camp?
I don't think we can cherry pick pieces out of legislation. I understand. And I agree that was how the motion was worded, but it really should be to put it in the allowed column and then we vote on the whole thing.
I think the intent is pretty clear.
I also don't want to set a precedent that we're doing something wild. That's what I'm more concerned about, that we're breaking protocol.
Let's just
leave it.
We'll take it under advisement for future.
Okay, let's do that in the second time. So now we still have the denied claims motion to address.
We're back onto the main motion.
Main motion as
of all the
amended, yeah.
claims.
And I think we need no more discussion. Let's call the roll.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen.
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Item 5B is approving an interlocal agreement between the city and RTSD for monitoring use of not less than 1.5% of the 1/4 cent sales tax increase, introduced by Christensen.
So moved.
Second.
Yeah, motion by Councilman Christensen, second by Councilman Eskridge. Discussion, Councilwoman Lamb.
Thank you. I do have a motion to amend, but Chris, I gave that back to you. Did you give that to Teresa? Oh, yeah. So as I was reading through this, the first two paragraphs have to do with the interlocal agreement itself, and then the third and it says at the end of the second line of paragraph 1, it says that should the voters not approve the, no, this is not it. Should the voters not approve the sales tax, that this interlocal agreement will be terminated without any further action of the city or of the RTSD. And then it goes on to set up the administrative review committee. And so, and I think it's just called administrative committee. And so it's kind of confusing on if that in fact terminates at the time, because it sets up a 6-month termination clause. So I had asked the city attorney to just draft up a real quick
I gave that back to you, Cindy.
amendment.
That's my copy right there. Yes. Those two there.
No, these are on the next one. These are on at 7. Yeah. And so I asked that we just insert that this agreement, and did you locate it, Teresa?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the motion to amend I have is on page 1, number 2 of the interlocal agreement, insert, and the administrative committee.
Yes.
Is that the one you're talking to?
Yes.
Okay.
But could you read that?
Yes, so on page 1, paragraph, it says number 2, which I'm not sure.
Paragraph 2, mhm.
Okay, paragraph 2 of the interlocal agreement, insert, quote, and the administrative committee, end quote, immediately following interlocal agreement.
So it would say interlocal agreement and the administrative committee shall be terminated if the voters don't approve it without any further action from the city or the RTSD. So I would move that we amend it in that fashion.
Second.
Okay, motion by Councilwoman Lamb, second by Councilman Eskridge. Discussion?
We sound alike.
Pardon? Yep. Mr. Conley, would you help? I have a couple questions. Actually, I only have one, but that'll be. So this is, Councilman Christensen's worked a long time. We've negotiated a deal with lots of people. There have been lots of parties involved. Is this a substantial change that will affect? Yeah, that's my concern. We're making a change to the document that a lot of people have agreed to.
The change that the Councilwoman Lamb is suggesting is not going to have a major impact on how this works. The idea here is that this agreement is contingent upon approval of the sales tax increase and that it's going to go away. I don't think it's really going to be possible. There's no doubt that the interlocal agreement goes away if the sales tax increase is not approved. So to me, the administrative committee will also go away. Councilwoman Lamb would like to clarify that and make that more clear. And so I have no problem with adding that. But no, this is not a substantial change to the agreement.
Thank you very much. I feel better. Other questions? So there was a second by Councilman Eskridge.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other discussion? We'll call the roll on the motion to amend.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Now we're back to the main motion.
To the main motion. Any additional discussion?
Oh, excuse me.
Okay.
Can I ask Mr. Conley? So I just wanted to clarify for the listeners and observers that the administrative committee is simply to review the amount that's going to the railroad transportation system contract.
That is correct. It is, as the sales tax revenues become available for use on 33rd and Cornhusker, this administrative committee will oversee both the money as they come in and how they are being spent.
Okay, and one of the, someone who had come up and spoke had indicated, why do we need someone to tell us where the roads are? And so I just wanted to clarify for everyone that the administrative committee isn't oversight of our roads. They're oversight of this small portion that goes to 33rd and Cornhusker.
Within the administrative committee, within this interlocal, yes, that's correct. It only applies to 33rd and Cornhusker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conley.
That is all.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Seeing no other discussion, let's vote on this resolution.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0.
30% done.
Next is 5C, the freezing of the impact fee increases, introduced by Christensen.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Councilman Eskridge. Motion by Christensen, second by Councilman Eskridge. Discussion of the motion.
And we do have a motion to amend number 1 from John Camp.
I'll just pass on that, thank you.
You don't want to make that? Okay, very good. Simplifies it.
Okay.
All right.
Any other discussion of the motion? Would you call the roll, please?
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0. Item 5D then is directing submittal. This is putting it on the ballot, introduced by Christensen.
So moved.
Second.
A motion by Councilman Christensen, second by Councilwoman Raybold. Discussion of the motion to, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yet another good thing.
Would anyone else like to speak to this? Councilman Eskridge.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a nostalgic thing for me because 8 years ago, the month I was elected, my mom had a major medical issue out of state, and she died 2.5 years ago, and so I was traveling back and forth out of state, hometown a lot. And I kept noticing those roads sure are good. And so I met with Mickey and staff to see what they were doing that we weren't doing. And one difference is climate, but another big difference was in that particular location, the state had provided significant funding for their roads. And so it was a financial issue. It was a support problem that we didn't have here. And so I'm fully convinced. I was a part of the coalition and greatly appreciate that opportunity to learn more about our needs and fully convinced this is important and necessary for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Would others like to speak? Councilwoman Raybold.
Well, I do also want to thank the task force. I think when we have these public-private partnerships and the collaboration, it just makes the project and the outcome better. I think we are so fortunate in the city of Lincoln and Lancaster County to be one of the 3 counties in our state of Nebraska that keeps growing. And if you look at the last 12 years, there has been tremendous growth and tremendous development and economic development going on in our city. And we know that we're not keeping up with the pace and cost of expanding our roads, but most importantly, just the sheer cost of keeping up with that. And I think the staff has done a good job of demonstrating that we are doing our best, that we want to assure the public out there that we are spending and using every dollar of the wheel tax for our roads maintenance, and that we recognize that there is an increased deficit, and what do we do about it? And like most municipalities across our state, they're dealing with the same issue of the material cost increase, labor cost increase, inflation. We just cannot keep up with the demand to keep improving our roads. And a lot of cities are looking at, it's kind of like choose your poison. Do you want to go out for a bond issue? Do you want to figure out how to increase our impact fees? Do we go out and increase our wheel tax? Or do we do something like a short term, even though it's 6 years, it has a sunset clause, and I really commend that. It's up to all of us on this dais to live up to that commitment to the people who elect us, that we are going to make sure that we use those funds appropriately. And we ask that they place our trust in us in doing just that. And I think we demonstrated from the quarter-cent sales tax to improve our 911 call center, our radio system, and to build more fire stations. Why? Because we are a growing community. And I believe that we have lived up to using those funds wisely for what it was intended. And I ask that the public hold us accountable. That's how you do it. You hold us accountable for using the funds as we've promised we would and ending the collection of the funds when we say we will do that. That's how we live up to our commitment of building for our city's future and keep moving our city forward, because we are so fortunate to be in that position. So I do support this.
Councilwoman Lamb?
Thank you. So I was part of the coalition also, and I do thank all the people that participated. I think they took time out of their day for several months in order to participate in this. I do have disagreement with some of the things that came out of that coalition. I do have substantial disagreement with turning a deaf ear to constituents, because we did hear from some great groups today that came together and are supportive of this sales tax. The individuals I've heard from are not so supportive, and I even heard things tonight like, have mercy on taxpayers. We're talking about taxes at every level, and it's so much on everyone's mind, and it seems like the taxpayers are dying a death by 1,000 cuts. And sales tax is regressive. The folks that have lower income and have to pay a higher tax, they feel it. They feel it a lot. And while we want to have our residential streets repaired and maintained, we have to pay attention to the lack of priority on that over the last years and be accountable for that before we go out asking for more money from the taxpayers. It is time that the city put proper priorities on the roads, the public safety that includes roads, pay attention to the taxpayer dollars, and live within our means, just as so many households throughout our city do. And I do think, the question I got most often, and I was just reviewing because I got another one, how do the taxpayers know, or how do they have confidence that we're spending that money the way we say we're going to, especially when we're moving money around from here to there, when we come up with extra pots of money, when there are certain specific wants of someone in the community, rather than concentrating on the needs of the community. I am extremely disappointed that we didn't just consider a delay of that $36 million project. And one project, if this need was that urgent, the question came to me, if the need was that urgent to do these repairs all over town, why didn't we use that $30 million and spread it all over town instead of using one project? That represents what's going to be collected in about 2.5 years of the sales tax. So I won't be supporting putting it on the ballot. I will say that to the degree I can be, if it goes on the ballot and if, in fact, taxpayers pass the measure, then to the degree I'm able, I will hold city officials to their feet to the fire as much as I can. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Camp?
Thank you. This is obviously a major issue before us. In most of my campaigns that I've had for city council, which is 5, I've always said there are 3 major challenges of city government. One is police safety. Secondly is, now I call it medical and fire safety. And third is infrastructure. Those are the 3 main functions of city government. And I've always said that infrastructure. And so today we're looking at something infrastructure, and those of you who were here in the room when Mayor Beitler testified may recall I asked him what message that he and I could leave to the council and other future leaders here as they operate the municipal government. And I think it's very important to recognize that those are 3 priorities we have. I also had another former city council member tell me when I was first elected that you need to distinguish between wants and needs. And one of the difficult things that we face all the time is that wants, what people would like, have been elevated a lot so that suddenly the need, everything has become a need, or a lot of things have become needs. And that's where we need to be very careful in our administration and use of the city revenues so that we're really meeting those essential needs first. And again, I go back to police, medical and fire, and infrastructure. And so where we're at now is we've fallen behind. We are really behind. And so this is going to be something of a stopgap, $13 million a year. As the committee reported, we really need more than that. I think we need to be more vigilant, and when I say we as a collective community and those people who represent us in the future need to be very vigilant and ensure that every dollar that is raised, that it's spent in a very fiscally efficient manner. Because I think we can look back at some past projects where we've overspent on a number. And we need to get to the bare bones and make sure that our infrastructure is there. I think everybody in this room was talking about ways to get to school, ways to get to jobs, and so forth. That a city, a society lives on its infrastructure, and we're not alone in that. We're facing it nationally, but nonetheless, the sales tax, if it's approved by the voters, will be a step in that direction, but we still need to be very vigilant, and I challenge future leaders and citizens to continue that vigilance to see that we hit the needs first, we satisfy the needs first, and then we look to wants.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman?
I would just say that a no vote doesn't get anything done, and a no vote doesn't let people of Lincoln have the option of weighing in at the ballot on this critical infrastructure that is so vital to economic growth and jobs and public safety and strengthening neighborhoods. I want people to have that option, that opportunity to weigh in. I will be supporting this.
Thank you. And batting cleanup, I'd like to say that this was a long negotiation, and there are things that I wanted that are left out. There are things that we all compromised on, and it's a compromise across a large number of people in an effort to make our community better for everyone. And I will be voting yes, and I look forward to talking with voters about it in the future. Seeing no one else, please call the roll.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
No.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 6-0.
1.
6-1.
6-1.
You just got reduced.
I know.
I'd like to thank everyone for their patience and all the testifiers that participated. I appreciate all of your efforts. Thank you. We still have some agenda items to go to, so I'm going to give it back to Teresa.
Next, then, are our public hearing ordinances second reading. Item 6A, change of zone 18032, application of Waterford Estates 3 to R4 on approximately 1.23 acres, and from R4 to R3 on approximately 0.31 acres on property generally located at North 102nd and O Street.
Good evening, members of the council. Danae Kalkowski appearing tonight on behalf of Waterford Estates. The item before you really is just a cleanup matter to adjust some zoning lines so that they'll match a special permit application that's already been approved by the Planning Commission. We have an area out in Waterford south of the lake and kind of toward the southeast corner of that development that is in for proposed special permit for some townhome development. The area is largely zoned R4 already, and so we're just cleaning up a couple of corners that were R3 and now need to be zoned R4. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Questions for the testifier? Thank you very much for coming forward. And I think we're ready for our next agenda item.
Next, then, is item 6B, change of zone 18033, application of Jeff Kopecki to designate 1600 O Street as a local historic landmark.
Stacy Hageman, Planning Department.
Stacy, would you pull that microphone toward you a little? Yeah, sorry.
Very short.
Yeah, it's kind of pushed further away from you, too.
I'll just give a brief presentation. This is the applicant, Jeff Kepke. He is here to answer any questions that you might have for his plans for the building. This change of zone is to designate the Strode Building a Lincoln landmark. It's a 2-story brick building on the northeast corner of 16th and O Streets. It's a very early, large, purpose-built automotive building in Lincoln, and it's on a very prominent corner in downtown. Its location is in Lincoln's early automobile row along the Detroit-Lincoln-Denver Highway. It was built by Edmund C. Strode, who purchased the property in 1907, shortly after a time serving as Lincoln's city attorney. He first developed the site with an open-air theater that was used for ice skating in the wintertime before he contracted local architects Fisk and McGinnis to design this automotive building. This is an early view looking north on 16th Street.
That is early.
They had cars.
There's a picture of Edmund Strode, and this is his daughter, Josephine, who eventually inherited the property. They were residents of the Phillips Castle at 19th and D Streets, a very prominent house in the near south neighborhood. When Ed Strode died in 1920, then the property, along with Phillips Castle, passed to his daughter Josephine. She was one of the youngest people to enroll at the university at the age of 14. And she married Carlisle Logan Jones, who at one point ran an automotive business in the Strode Building. Later, they moved to Los Angeles, where he worked for Warner Brothers Studios. This is the first floor plan of the original building. As you can see, it was divided into 2 bays. Each one had their own storeroom in the front, and then storage. On the second floor was the shop, and each bay had an elevator that was able to lift automobiles to the second floor for repairs. This is the newspaper article announcing the building and that the Nebraska Oldsmobile Company would be one of the first tenants in the building. They were a tenant on the west side in 1600 O Street. The second bay, 1608 O Street, was occupied by Shore and Beach Automobile Company.
What year was that again? The year at the top of the article, 37?
1917.
1917.
And this is a bunch of advertisements. As you can see, there were a lot of different automobile companies that were located in this building throughout the years. And you can see here the Logan Jones Motor Company, so that was the son-in-law of Mr. Strode. It even, for a time, was a miniature golf course. You can see the circus there. And then I just have a couple 1940s images of how the building looked. These are McDonald's studio photos. I'll just add that the proposed preservation guidelines are based on the Secretary of Interior standards, which is what we typically use for guidelines for landmark buildings. And also the Historic Preservation Commission reviewed and unanimously recommended approval of the landmark designation in December.
Questions?
Sir, thank you, City Council. My name is Jeff Kepke, and I appreciate being a part of trying to lighten the mood today.
Thanks, Jeff.
Our intention is to renovate the building back to historical condition, and we're wanting to develop it into a mixed-use space with apartments on second floor and retail, and maintain its indoor parking. So if you have any questions.
You got one? I got one. You want to go first?
I'll go.
Councilman Eskridge.
Thank you, thank you. And thanks for for this. You know, it's important, in my opinion, that we do what we can to save our older treasures that we have in the community, including Councilman Camp. So we're so there are 13 apartments, I think I read, on the second floor, and then on the first floor, parking and some other commercial development
Correct.
to be announced at a future date. Yeah.
Approximately 5,000 square feet along O Street, and then the indoor parking would be in the rear of the first floor.
Okay. Yeah, sounds great.
Councilman Camp, did you have
I
something?
just want to wish you good luck. Yeah, the same architects did the Apothecary Building, which I think is the premier building in Haymarket, but they were an excellent group of architects, so good
Yes.
luck.
Thank you.
I'd like to say I think I'm really excited about this. This is wonderful, but I lost an auto mechanic in the process.
Yeah, I apologize for that.
It hurt for a minute, but yes, I'm thinking the future of this corner is going to be wonderful. Thank you.
You're one of quite a few people that lost a mechanic.
Yeah, people were calling me, do you know what's happening there? And yeah, we all kind of panicked a bit. Thank you, though. I'm excited about the opportunity to see more residential in the downtown neighborhood and just revitalizing the building. It'll be wonderful. Now, I'm going to stop talking. After anyone else a chance to speak.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions for these testifiers? I think we're public hearing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anybody else?
Is anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on this agenda item?
Okay.
All righty. So next agenda item.
Next then is item 6C, change of zone 18034, application of Boyd Batterman for a change from AGR agricultural to R1 residential on property generally located at 3700 South 84th Street.
Good evening, council members. Brad Marshall with Olson here on behalf of Mr. Batterman to bring forward this change of zone from AGR to R1. We brought through a redevelopment plan for this acreage along 84th Street. Special permit is basically an extension of the Firethorn special permit, and this is the change of zone component. It basically lays out a an acreage that is going to bring on and maintain the existing home and bring on 8 additional single-family lots in the area. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Questions for this testifier? Marshall, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this agenda item? Seeing no one coming forward, let's move to our next item.
All right, next is item 6D and E. They are change of zone 05061C, application of Nebraska Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association to amend the planned unit development, including the site plan and phasing, and to add excavating as a conditional use on property generally located at South First and West Denton Road, and approving amendment number 2 to the Highway 77 and Warlick Boulevard conditional annexation and zoning agreement between the city and various applicants to amend the Southwest Village PUD site plan on property generally located at South First and West Denton Road, and to clarify the requirements for construction of infrastructure improvements to serve the PUD.
Good evening, members of the council. Danae Kalkowski. I'm appearing tonight on behalf of Nebraska Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association. With me tonight is also Lynn Schuler. I'm going to give you a little bit of the basics, and then Lynn's going to give you a little bit of the background as to why the horsemen are coming forward with these amendments today. Nate Buzz from Olson Associates is also here, and we have Craig Wolf in the audience from the horsemen. The 2 applications that we have before you tonight involve kind of a change in the plans out here with respect to the track. The area that we're talking about is really just the AG component of that Southwest Village PUD. So we've got West Denton Road, Homestead Expressway, and then you've got South First Street that comes down through here. The lighter colored area is all the AG area, and that's the component that we're going to be amending or requesting the amendment on today. This was more the industrial area, if you recall, with more of the commercial uses to the north of West Denton Road. So we came back in 2012 with a phased plan out here for development. Phase 1 was the simulcast facility, which is up and going, and it was anticipated that the track would be phase 2. The amendment request that's before you today reduces the size of the proposed track. And the significance and why we're here talking about it is because it allows us now to keep South First Street in the same location as it is today. We will no longer need to relocate that street, so it requires a formal amendment to the PUD. So that's kind of the number one thing on the PUD amendment. Second component of that PUD amendment would allow us to potentially do some soil mining out here in the middle of the track as they build that track. And since we're in an AG area, that's still an appropriate use for this area. Then the second item that's on your agenda is amendment to the annexation agreement. When we came in 2012, we amended it to provide for the relocation of First Street. So we're back basically addressing that, leaving First Street where it is, but then addressing what improvements will be needed with the next phase when the track is built, because there will be some intersection improvements that are then needed in South First Street. So I'd like to now let Lynn maybe talk to you a little bit about why the Horsemen are making this change, and then we'll both be available for questions.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the council. Lynn Schuler, SCHULLER, 7055 South First Street, which is the location of Lincoln Racecourse. The reason we're requesting these changes are because originally when we had proposed the 1 mile track, that was our ultimate dream of the perfect surface. When we got into the cost of moving First Street and moving major power lines, which are also in the area, it became extremely cost prohibitive. By reducing it from a mile track to a 7/8 mile track, it reduced the actual cost by several $1 million. So we thought that losing that 1/8 of a mile would be worth being able to construct the actual racetrack oval today rather than maybe 20 years from now. The actual oval that we're using is shorter in length on the straightaways, but the turns are identical to Churchill Downs where the Kentucky Derby is run. So we are confident that it will be a good surface in terms of size and area. And for those of you who are not involved in horse racing, the turns are important in terms of maintaining the safety of the horse and rider. The tighter your turns are, the more dangerous it becomes. So that's why it's important for us to have a larger track. The track at State Fair Park, if you had ever been there, was 5/8 of a mile. So this will be significantly larger than the track that we had at the former State Fair Park site. We are really looking forward to getting started on this. This is a more conservative approach than what the council had already approved. So we're hoping that we get a favorable response today.
Yeah, this item was up in front of Planning Commission, no opposition. We had a unanimous support of the Planning Commission.
Thank you, ladies. Questions from the council?
I don't know if you're aware, but Lincoln is the oldest city in terms of racing in the state of Nebraska. You've had horse racing continuously for over 100 years.
Wow. As a person who grew up in Kentucky and has spent many a Sunday with my friends at the racetrack having breakfast and looking out saying, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if there was a course? I'm excited about the opportunity.
Yeah, we are too.
Yeah. It's a big building out there, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be, I'll stop talking.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well timed. Well timed.
Other questions from the council? Teresa, let's move to our next agenda item before punchy up. Yeah.
Actually, that concludes our public hearing. We can move into the voting session.
All right, let's do that.
All right, item 7A is approval of a purchase agreement between the city and PSNY LLC, whereby PSNY assigns to the city its lease of property generally located at 1330 N Street, introduced by Camp.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Councilman Camp, second by Councilman Eskridge. Discussion of the motion? Councilman Camp.
Yeah, although I introduced this, I'm not going to support it. The downtown area is greatly in need of parking, especially in the southeast quadrant. As I've just run the numbers in the past, it's just a very expensive option, and I just can't be supportive of it.
Other comments? Seeing no other comments? Would you call the roll, please?
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
No.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
No.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried
5-2.
5-2. Next then is item 7B, approving the Lead Place Residences redevelopment agreement, introduced by Camp.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilman Camp, second by Councilman Eskridge. Discussion. Whoa. Lots of hands over here. Councilwoman Lamb first.
Thank you. I'm pretty excited about this project. I love, whenever I say to someone it's a skinny scraper, they want to know, what do you mean? And I'm just excited about the look it's going to bring, and I think it's going to fit great down across from the Lead Center and just be really impressive improvement for our city. So I appreciate this project. I'll be voting for it.
Councilman Camp.
Yes, and I am proud to introduce this. I've worked with these folks for years and seen this develop, and Doug Rath of Talent Plus has been one of the instrumental people, and it's just quite a challenging project, and he's going to be using, as part of his participation in this, experts from around the world, things he's seen in Singapore and elsewhere. So we're blessed to have this development coming.
Thank you, Councilman. Other comments? Councilwoman Gaylor Baird.
Among the many impressive components of this project was the commitment of the applicant to having subsidize and ensure that there is an active first floor restaurant component that will help revitalize Q Street in addition to the residents above.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Other comments? Seeing no one else, would you please call the roll?
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Next then is item 7C, amending the fiscal year 18-19 CIP to authorize and appropriate up to $5 million in TIF funds for the Lead Place Residences redevelopment project, introduced by Camp.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilman Camp, second by Councilman Christensen. Councilwoman Lamb would like to speak.
I just had a staff question. David Carey, maybe? Or someone?
Don't see Mr.
Or
Landis.
someone?
Yeah.
Anyone?
Can you help us, Mr. Carey? Help us, David Carey.
Thank you. This is just in response to some questions I got from some constituents, and they were concerned about the blighting because they make the point that they don't believe that downtown is blighted anymore. And so I wanted to ask you, and if you know, when this area was blighted, and the other question that was given to me was, does a blighting designation end, and if so, how?
I think I'm in a position where I'm not your best person to ask these questions to. I can give you very general answers to that, but not probably what you're looking for right now. It's going to be part of it is part of the center redevelopment plan, and there's a long history of that, and that plan changes over time when these new projects come in. There is a designation of blighted and substandard. A study is done, actions taken to acknowledge that study. I'm not going to be able to tell you specifically when that happened and when that could be taken off the rolls at this time.
Okay. I will follow up with Mr. Landis.
Okay. I think we might have some help. Councilman Christensen.
I know the answer.
Oh, good.
There is no formal procedure by which we remove a blighted condition from an area, and to my knowledge, it has never happened. All blighted areas that were blighted remain blighted.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Christensen. Other questions? Hearing no other questions, I'm ready for a roll call. Madam Clerk, if you are.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird? Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Next then is item 7D, authorizing the issuance of tax allocation bonds, introduced by Camp.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilman Camp, second by Councilwoman Raybold. Discussion.
Is there a mic on?
I think so. Yeah, thank you.
Comments, discussion? Seeing no one, would you call the roll, please?
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Next then is item 7E. Amending Chapter 3.16 of the Lincoln Municipal Code relating to the collection of sales and use tax to add a provision setting forth a process for notifying retailers not less than 30 days and not more than 45 days in advance of any increase to, reduction of, or termination of the city-imposed sales and use tax rate. Introduced by Lamb.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion by Councilwoman Lamb, second by Councilman Christensen. Discussion? Councilwoman Lamb.
Thank you. I do have one motion to amend, and it's actually motion to amend number 2. I'm not going to introduce number 1. Okay. And motion to amend number 2. Teresa, if you can give that to me, I'll just read that to my colleague to make sure. Thank you. I'm going to add a section 2. Failure to provide notice as set forth herein shall not invalidate any increase or decrease in the local option sales tax. And in doing that, we'll also renumber the current section 2 to section 3. And did I get a second on that? So I'm going to move for the motion?
Yeah, there we go. Now we're in good shape.
Thank you, yes. Yeah, so basically, it was never my intention to invalidate any sales tax at all. We just wanted the notification. So we made to make that very clear in this.
Discussion of the motion to amend? Hearing no discussion, we'll let the clerk get situated and call the roll on the motion to amend.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Now we're back to the main motion.
Thank you. Councilwoman Lamb?
Yeah, I just have a statement. I just think that this is us doing a better job of serving not only the businesses in our community, but also the residents that shop here and as well as visitors that shop here. So appreciate support on this particular ordinance. Thank you.
Other comments from the council? Hearing none, would you call the roll, please?
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Next then is item 7F, text amendment 18014, application of the planning director to amend various code conditions, introduced by Raybold.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion by Councilwoman Raybold, second by Councilman Eskridge. Discussion, Councilwoman Raybold.
I have a motion to amend number 1. Based on contributions from members in our community, certainly the building and development community, particularly we want to encourage development of our urban core. So I make a motion to exempt parking lots that are 5,999 square feet or smaller from installing an interior parking island, and to exempt the shade tree requirements for parking lots that are 5,999 square feet or smaller from the shade tree requirements, and to retain the current standards for understory and tree requirements for screening and landscaping going forward. And in Table 3, it has additional open space screening, and I know in the proposed changes to it, we're just going back to what is the existing standard for the number of trees.
And that's your motion to amend, right?
Correct.
I would like to have a second. I didn't.
Second.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eskridge. Any additional?
Yes.
Councilman
I'd like
Camp.
to make a motion to amend the motion and change the 6,000 square feet to 15,000 square feet.
Second.
Okay. I have a motion by Councilman Camp, second by Councilman Christian to amend the motion to amend.
Right. And essentially, I guess
Councilman
it'd be 14,999, but just based on my experience and seeing a lot of the urban center and so forth, you just need to give some more latitude to people to encourage them to develop. It's just very cost expensive, and the parking requirements are important, and so the landscaping hasn't resulted as much as we would like. And I think in turn what we can do, or instead, is defer to the ingenuity of the developers, because it's a competitive market out there, and they're going to want to have attractive property, but rather than dictate what they need to do, let's let their ingenuity ride to the top.
Comments from the council?
Could you repeat that, John?
I'm just changing 6,000 to 15,000. And then it follows throughout the measure there.
So everywhere it says 6,000, change it to 15,000.
Correct.
And then that would, I'm sorry.
They go through the charts as well.
Yeah, and then on the chart, it would say 14,999. Is there
We are less than 15 on the first table 2, table 3. It would say below 15,000 on building coverage.
I'd like to get some comments from Mr. Curry. I'm sorry, did I step on it? Would other council people like to? Yeah.
David Carey with the Planning Department.
I'm having trouble envisioning the size and the areas of the city this is going to happen. Can you help me understand?
Yeah, I think I might share my thought on that just to see if if the discussion can go a certain direction. The 6,000 square feet is meant to be as it already exists in the standard, kind of that demarcation for smaller parking lots that often go with those smaller lots that we have been talking about as well. And so that is the purpose of the 6,000 square foot demarcation point. As we were looking at these motions to amend, the Planning Department and myself included, understood that that the going back to the existing standard was the intent of Councilman Raybold's motion. The 15,000 I think would start to exempt what's already on the books for some of these areas as far as what the requirement is. That wasn't the direction we were going in on this proposal. So that's why I would recommend at this point to hold it to that 6,000, because the 6,000 is established in the standards right now for the purpose of getting those requirements going, or limiting those requirements, I guess is the case here, at the 6,000 for those smaller lots.
Councilman Eskridge.
Yes, James could answer this maybe. So a 6,000 square foot parking lot, how many cars would that park, or John?
About 10 to 13, right?
I would trust
Yeah,
Ms. Rabel.
Same nods from
information.
Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Small.
it's not real large. It's not the smallest that we see, but that threshold is kind of where it becomes, if you go lower than the 6,000, becomes difficult to, in some situations, to fit some of this in, and I think that's the perspective of the existing standards. So to go up to 15,000, I think, is to take away what we already have on the books for these standards.
Councilwoman Raybold.
And John, I'm not going to support that change because, when you look at those smaller lots, they're the ones that are the most challenged to make every square foot count and to make sure that they can have a return on investment for every one of those square foot of development that they reinvest in. So I wanted to make sure that, particularly in the urban core, the land is a little bit tighter and denser. And I still want the existing changes to go forward, because if a developer is having challenges more than normal trying to get all the parking stalls to fit and how they want to rehab the facility, anyone can request a waiver anytime during the process working with the planning department. And I can tell you my experiences with the planning department before I became an elected official have always been positive, that they are willing to work with the owner and the developer. And you don't always need to have an attorney with you, and you don't always need to have spending funds on redesigning and coming up with new architectural landscape plans. It's a give and take if you're willing to make the time and work with the planning department, and a little bit of negotiating as well, explaining, the difficulties or challenges that you're facing in trying to do the project as you envision it, while at the same time being in compliance with all the landscaping and parking requirements, depending upon your use. So I I particularly wanted to encourage the urban core development because I think that's really important to the vitality and vibrancy of our neighborhoods. And also, I wanted to make sure that we kept some of the landscaping requirements. I pulled back on some of the understory square footage as well as the number of shade trees because that requires above and beyond the existing green space that is already in the books by increasing it. And I pulled back so that you are with the existing understory requirements and going back to the existing number of trees, rather than creating that greater challenge for any developer to put in more green space, because that means less parking or less space to add on or expand to your building, which is what we hope to see, and encourage development. So that's why I was concerned about balancing requirements that could be a little bit burdensome with protecting the smaller developments that are already challenged anyway, trying to maximize their space without adding an excessive amount of green space. That could be site obstruction or just another limitation on the number of parking stalls that they could provide.
Thank you. Other comments from the council? We'll let her go first and let you wrap up.
Thank you.
Lamb.
So I just have a couple questions. There's a, thank you. So
almost so close.
There's an empty or unused space up on North 48th Street that used to be at one time it was a gas station and then it was just a convenience store. It's north of Vine Street. And now it's boarded up, and it's been boarded up for quite some time, and it
east of Y.
Yes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm hoping that would be a small 6,000 square foot parking lot. But if they take that down that building, then are we looking at, what if they decide to build something smaller? I don't know. Is there any chance that would be somewhere between the 6,000 and 15,000 as it sits now? Or do you have maybe a example of a 15,000 or so square foot parking lot? Anyone?
Okay. I'm gonna go to Councilman Camp, maybe.
Well, if you want to visualize something that's in a downtown area, square block, typically in the commercial district has 300 by 300 face. So
Okay.
15,000 square feet is going to be 1/6 of a block. Not a lot of area.
Okay.
And I think what I'm suggesting by putting the 15,000 in is the opposite of what planning's doing. I don't think it's in our best interest to put the burden on the developer to come forward and say, this is what it is. It really does create a regulatory hurdle, and we put so much on there already, and you're talking about smaller spaces, and it is economically very challenging to make them work. Now, it's a little bit different if, Ms. Rabel, we're doing a big grocery store lot like you're doing with tens of acres of parking, and even then, as you know, putting in spaces or whatever, you can't get trees to grow. You end up with bark in those. I mean,
Sure.
that's
There's no
exemplified.
doubt
And so
about
you do it, you let the trees die, and then you just go back to mulch and nothing. And so let's work, and instead of putting them through a regulatory hurdle, and that's what we keep hearing is the regulations in Lincoln are so tough. On a home building, you can't get a lot for a residence for under 50,000 anymore. There are just so many costs and so forth. And so we're doing just the opposite. And the entrepreneurial talent that you see of people who will come out and do some of these smaller projects that make it work because of the sweat and toil, you're making them work even harder. You know, Jane, you and I have been experienced to, yes, we can represent ourselves, but a lot of the people, you know, to hire an attorney, God bless attorneys, my fellow brethren and all, but and Cindy, and Carl, it can get expensive for the designs and so forth. So let's try to induce people and defer to their creativity. And I think when they go through the planning process, at that time, I more than welcome Mr. Carey and his associates in the planning department to say, Mr. Developer, Ms. Developer, here's an idea for you to really add some beauty to that. Let them be in a positive way rather than saying, here's what you got to do, unless somehow you can convince me I'll let something up a little. Then you get to negotiate and give this or that. I think it's the wrong message we're sending out. We want to encourage these inner areas to be improved rather than be boarded up like the example you gave, Ms. Lamb.
Well, Cindy, you had asked a question, and I can come up with a couple of examples. So we had a Save Best store on 27th and Y, and that's probably around 15,000 square feet of parking lot. And it had a tremendous amount of landscaping on the perimeter of the store surrounding it. And then another great example is
Right away. That was in the city's right away there.
the city's right away.
That wasn't on your
No,
land.
there was some also on the other side of the sidewalk as well, where there was a few trees. Also, 48th in University Place, where the Walgreens is located. So that would be probably another size comparable of what, 15,000. That was probably a little bit more maybe.
But neither of those are in the inner core.
Those are
There's
in the
something-
neighborhoods.
There's something in the Save Best now, right? A Family Dollar or a Total Dollar or Consumer Dollar?
That's coming in there, yeah.
Okay.
It's a place where I could spend without asking the price.
Back when the original Mr. Carey, I'm sorry. I have a question. Back when the original presentation was given to us, we talked about O Street from like 33rd going west. Can you give me a ballpark of how much of the city, how much property would it be affected if we made a change? Or if we
Well,
stuck with this? We're going back to the original standards with Ms. Raybow's motion, correct?
A couple of things I would say. One is that if we were to go back to the existing standards, as it was proposed by the amendment from Councilwoman Raybould, our process we did not hear that the existing standards were onerous on development. We also, as part of this process, went into good faith negotiations with the development community after we brought it forward, worked with the various members of the development community to come up with a reasonable proposal that really did address pretty much all the questions that we had. This was not one of the questions that came up, to be fair, to go further behind on the existing standard. So I would suggest that to do something like that is not the intent of this package at this point. To answer your question directly about how much of that are we talking about, I think the effort here on the proposals, the motions to amend that we have, are really meant to deal with these small lots. And when we talk about small lots, and this is where the 150-foot depth of lot comes in, we're talking about lots that are 10,000 square feet, very limited in size. And even in those situations, we showed in this process that some of this, perhaps not all of the standards that were proposed could fit on those small lots, but some of it could, and could be a benefit to the lot. Excuse me. Putting that aside, I do not believe that the 15,000 square foot is beneficial to this package, mainly because it has not been part of the discussion to this point, and we did not hear that proposal coming from the development community through this process.
Other questions from staff? Thank you, Mr. Carey. So we have a motion to amend, the motion to amend. We have a motion and second. I think we're ready to vote on the motion to amend the size from 5,999 to 14,999. Would you call the roll?
Eskridge?
No.
Gaylor Baird?
No.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
No.
Schob?
No.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion lost 3-4.
Now we're back to the original motion to amend offered by Councilwoman Raybould. I don't think we need any additional discussion. Would you call the roll, please?
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
No.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 6-1.
So that was the motion to amend. Now we're back to the original motion. I think I'm on track.
I have a motion.
I'm sorry, Councilwoman Lamb, forgive me.
Thank you. I have a motion to amend number 2, and we passed this out last week. I passed this out, and basically it's a copy of the
You scared?
Proposal put forward by planning, and it basically has to do with the just under section, and this is in attachment B. and section 7.1B and the perimeter screening. So if you look at your copy, you should have the blue, which is offered by planning, and then the numbers, primarily looking at numbers 2 through 5 are what the proposal is for. And basically the summary was just to tell you there's just a couple changes. The language that planning has in the order has made it clearer, and this just clarifies a little further. So it exempts from screening contained in the current zoning code. The exemptions previously in 7.1 have been moved to 7.1B2, and then it adds a little bit of clarity on the parking lots separated only by an alley. So we're talking about screening necessary for abutting parking lots. This takes away that requirement and kind of defines an alley as abutting property, so it exempts them also from the screening. And then it also, as in on what is now the new number 4, on corner lots, the front 6 feet landscape area shall be required along each street unless the distance between the street right-of-way and the opposite lot line is less than 150 feet, I'm sorry. So.
When there was a motion, did I receive a second? Thank you, Councilman Camp. We have a motion and second. Any additional discussion? This is a motion to amend again. Seeing no additional discussion, I think we're ready for a roll call.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
That was the motion to amend. Now back to the original motion.
Pardon me.
And that was, I pushed the wrong button.
We're still on the item 7F.
Yes, and we've already one motion to amend. Are there other motions?
Call the roll.
Any other motions?
Okay, we're good. Madam.
Yeah, so I don't have any other motion, and I don't think anyone else has any other motion, but I want to talk about
Okay, so we're done with motions to amend. We're back to the original motion, which had a motion and second, so we're ready for discussion, and you're up.
Yes, thank you. So for me, I guess I'm really not wanting to support this. I feel like this is a property rights issue, what people can do with their property. And as I listen to the testimony, I mean, this all sounds beautiful and everything, but the number one reason was aesthetics. That was the reason given. Number one was aesthetics. Other new developments are doing it, and so we like it, so we should make everyone do it, was kind of what I was hearing. And then the number two was to make it more appealing, which again is aesthetics, to draw people in and so forth. And basically, I think that what we have been hearing, there's no doubt about it, about affordability of real estate in our city and affordability of development, and everything that we add onto a developer adds time and money. And so when we add time, we add money on top of whatever money we're already requiring them in addition. And so I'm not supportive of this. Just because of that, I think for property rights, it's very difficult not to let people who've purchased property, and especially when I look at property that's abandoned in different places of town, and you want to draw developers in. And I realize this doesn't necessarily apply specifically to the property I'm talking about, but I do think that's a concern. Now with these different stores going out of business and we're having more property, we're going to see more development. And I just like to see people be able to do what they want with their property without having to go over the top and make it expensive for the tenants that come later and so forth. So,
thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Christensen?
Well, I think what this does in the end is makes obtaining and maintaining property more expensive. even if that property is only on the periphery of town, any increase in property values there affects property values everywhere. And as a result, increasing property values is contrary to my goals of trying to find market solutions to affordable housing problems. I appreciate the amendments. They make a bad thing not quite as bad, but I won't support it because it's still bad.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Raybold?
You know, I'm going to support this. As a builder, a developer of large and small tracts of land, it's important. I have to do what the market wants me to do in many cases, and the market is my customers, and they want to see that we have a couple of things. We have a parking lot that's nicely landscaped, and most importantly, that we have a parking lot that is well lit so that people feel safe, they feel the space is inviting, and you know, that's the consumer that we have. And as a retailer in a very challenging market, we have a very savvy group of customers out there where they have so many choices now. They could, you know, they can do all their shopping online if they so choose, but we have to compete in that marketplace. And we want to make our space as inviting as possible to our customers so they want to come to our stores, that they want to come and shop in person, and that they come away with a great shopping experience, and of course, value that we provide them and their families. And I have to tell you, it's challenging. And I talk about a balance all the time. As a business owner, there has to be that balance. We really don't want regulations to choke our retailers so that they are not as successful as they possibly can be. On the other hand, we have to create spaces that are as inviting as physically possible based on limitations of the space itself, but also dollars. You know, it is a balance. The retailers that I know care deeply about our city. They want to make sure that our city is a welcoming, safe, well-lit place so that people want to come and shop. And in some of those areas where we've seen some of the large big box retailers file for bankruptcy and close, we do have this hope that that space is going to be redeveloped, maybe for an entirely different use. It may not be a retailer. It could be for more affordable housing. And that is a hope that we have for our city. We'd love to see something like that happen. As our consumer choices change and how they shop change, we have to change with it. And I'm of the mindset that there is that balance. We have to make sure that some regulations are not overly burdensome and don't drive up the cost of us to be able to deliver on our commitment to our customers and our constituents. So I'm going to support this.
Other comments from the council?
Yeah.
Yes, Councilwoman Gaylor Baird.
Well, vibrant and competitive 21st century cities have to have the basics taken care of, and a bunch of us voted tonight for concrete. But vibrant 21st century cities also need to be verdant and attractive to compete for the best workers and for people to choose to live in our community, and particularly in core neighborhoods where we have a number of low-income residents. I want children in those neighborhoods to have green space near them too, and I think this is also in the interest of equity in our community. I'll be supporting this package.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I did hear from some developers in the community and some other residents about this issue, and I understand the need for design standards. I think what I hear often is predictability. So I think going from this point forward, we'll have some predictability. I kind of want to echo what my friend Councilman Christensen said. He used the word makes a bad thing less bad. I'm going to go, this just makes it a little easier for developers. I'm not going to go, yeah, but I'm going to support it. I think it's a healthy way to set a standard for the future so developers will know where we're going. Seeing no one else with any comments, I would ask you to call the roll.
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
No.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
No.
Christensen?
No.
Motion carried 4-3.
Thank you. And that should about do it, shouldn't it?
Yes, that concludes our voting session.
Let's talk about first readings and then.
Resolutions on first reading are items 8A through G. Ordinances on first reading are items 9A through E. Our pending list are items 11A through C.
Mr. Chair, I'd move for
Oh,
adjournment.
so isn't it?
What?
Never mind.
No, no. I'm taking his motion. He's got a motion to adjourn. right?
Second.
Got my second. Would you call the roll, please?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Motion carried, 7-0.
We are adjourned.